woman devoted to her town.
She was the deputy county treasurer. Away from the courthouse, you saw a different person. She loved to dance.
Her life snuffed out in a savage attack.
There was quite a bit of blood.
She had to be beaten pretty severely.
She had to have been terrified. She struggled at the end of her life.
She had no enemies. Nobody had a clue who would do something like that.
Police investigate several troubling theories.
Is it a close friend that got into an argument with her?
There had been some shouting matches.
Maybe she interrupted a burglary or a theft.
After months of false leads and dead ends,
the town was on high alert.
A stunning discovery breaks open the case.
It added a new twist to the crime.
All of a sudden you realize, maybe I don't know all my neighbors.
And points to a murderer in their midst.
I was kind of speechless at first.
I thought, my gosh. I mean, you just can't believe it.
The tiny farming community of Colon, Nebraska is one of the smallest towns in America, with a population of just over 100 people.
Colon, Nebraska is a very laid-back community, very close-knit families there. I think that if you went there, you'd drive through and you go, oh, this is small.
Many people would leave their doors unlocked, their cars unlocked, keys left in the ignition, just a feel of safety, that there's no threat.
But then on June 30th, 2003, police receive a distressing call.
Around 6:42 in the evening, dispatch indicated to me that they had received a report of a possible suicide.
My friend ended up finding her body across the street in her garage, along with a gun.
He had called 911, and it was reported as a suicide. Once I arrived, the firemen on scene already were pointing me to a garage. I walked in and could see the body of a white female that was laying on the ground. There was quite a bit of blood, and there was disfigurement to the head and face area, so we could not recognize the victim. A black handgun was found near her head.
There is so much blood on the scene, investigators aren't able to determine the cause of death and need to wait for an autopsy to be sure.
The small black handgun didn't actually contain bullets, and we didn't find any shell casings in the area. The car had a smear on the driver's side, and then I did find that there was a smear of what appeared to be blood on the walk-in door that went out the side of the garage.
There was also what looked like blood spatter, where someone stepped in the pool of blood.
There was a footprint impression that was taken
that indicated that there was a second person there. This was a suspicious death.
There were DNA swabs taken on her body and of her clothing that she was wearing at the time. We noticed that her purse was located underneath her vehicle.
Was this just a botched burglary, or did the person have some other intention?
From the personal items in her purse, police identify the victim as 66-year-old Sharon Erickson.
Sharon was very well known. It was shocking to us as law enforcement to see somebody that was a fixture in the community being the victim in this case.
Born and raised in Nebraska's farm country, Sharon Erickson was a lifelong government worker.
Sharon worked across the hall from me. She was the deputy county treasurer. She was excellent, very honest. I would put her against anybody in the state of Nebraska for knowledge when it comes to the office of the treasurer. She would do anything for you. Gosh darn. When it came to the office or anything, she was always attentive and very, very helpful always.
In 1998, after 37 years of devoted service, Sharon retired.
Away from the courthouse, you saw a different person, more relaxed. She loved to dance, and if anyone wanted to dance, boom, she was on the dance floor. And boy, she was so good at dancing. I'm telling you what, boy, she could dance every dance until they'd shut the music off.
As a single woman, Sharon lived alone, but saw the people of Colon as her family.
People used to go to the bar and have coffee. Well, that one closed. Sharon came over and she says, I have a little front room in my house there. Would you come and remodel it and paint it for me? She had me fix that room up and gave the locals a key for coffee. Had a coffee pot in there. It was just somewhere where they could go. She didn't charge them. That's the type of person that you're talking about.
Police are at a loss when they realize Sharon was attacked just 50 feet away from the gathering spot she gifted to the town. Who could have wanted to kill her and why? Detectives expand their search for evidence to Sharon's home.
She lived in what used to be a grocery store and had converted to her house.
The other odd thing about Sharon's residence is that her garage was located across her house, and so to get to her car, she would have to walk out the front of her house and across Main Street.
What or who could have lured Sharon out of her home and to her death in the garage?
That we did find some damage to the back door that appeared to be consistent with some forced entry.
There was a coal chisel that was found next to the door that more than likely was used.
We also did find that the phone line had been cut.
There was at least some planning on the attack. Someone was obviously trying to prevent her from calling for help.
Inside, there was nothing out of place. When we started going room by room, we found that there was a holster for a small gun in her bedroom near the bed, and the gun was missing. That, along with her bed not being made and the back door having damage and being pried open, we started to have a picture in our minds that this may have occurred in the middle of the night.
Our assumption was that there was a burglary. She was alerted to the burglary because of noise coming from the person prying on the back door, that she got up out of bed, grabbed her gun, and went to investigate what was occurring before she was killed.
As investigators continue to process the scene, they are interrupted by volunteer firefighter and village postmaster Rick Hartman.
He was friends with Sharon. He actually was the one that found her body.
Mr. Hartman appeared to be a little more interested in the situation than some of the other firefighters that were there. Mr. Hartman had to be asked on several different occasions to stay behind the crime scene tape.
After it kept happening, it really alerted a lot of us to, why does he keep doing this? Is there something else going on? Is there something wrong?
Rick's behavior makes officers immediately suspicious, so they approach him for an interview on site.
During the interview, Mr. Hartman had indicated that he was really close friends with Sharon.
When Sharon would leave town, she would leave a key in her post office box for him to check on her house. So he was trusted by her.
Sharon would come visit him every day when she'd come pick up her mail.
But Rick tells police he didn't see Sharon that morning. He was asked to check on her after a worried relative didn't hear from Sharon that evening.
Rick Hartman, he had gone looking for Sharon. Sharon was nowhere to be found.
Mr. Hartman opened the garage door, and you could see Sharon laying beside her car.
Without prompting, he indicated that it was a suicide, that she had a gun, knew how to use it. But we were very confident that there was foul play involved.
When Rick is asked to make a formal statement, his demeanor abruptly changes.
He said, "If you're going to arrest me, otherwise I'm leaving." I was taken aback.
Why would he say that? Why would he do that?
We needed to look a little harder at this person and find out what that was all about.
Coming up, new evidence reveals a disturbing detail.
She'd been sexually assaulted. I was definitely shocked
Small town gossip sparks salacious rumors.
There may have been more than just a friendship there.
He was trying to hide additional evidence.
And just when detectives think they have the killer in their sights,
It had to be him.
a startling truth is revealed.
It sent shockwaves through the entire area.
I went, what? You've got to be kidding me.
Police investigating the murder of Sharon Erickson are speaking to her close friend, Rick Hartman. But when they ask him for a statement, Rick suddenly ends the interview.
He was upset that he couldn't leave and finally just told the investigators that I'm going to leave, and if you want to arrest me, go ahead and arrest me.
That was pretty out of character and uncharacteristic for somebody who had a friend that was just killed. So that immediately caused investigators some concern.
His statements and odd behavior really pointed us in a direction towards the postmaster.
Mr. Hartman gave his alibi. He was at home with his family, and that was confirmed by his wife.
Rick never had any criminal record or had done anything wrong, so there wasn't a great deal of focus on him any more than anybody else.
Rick's on the back burner for now, but investigators will keep him in their sights.
We didn't want to rule anybody out specifically, but we wanted to cast a wide net.
While investigators consider their next move, news of the murder, the first one in 40 years, travels fast.
The town of Colon was buzzing. Well, I got calls, bang, bang, bang. I can't remember who called first. I went, what? That's all I went, and I just was dumbfounded. I mean, I just couldn't believe it. When you hear of someone that you know and you knew for 25, 30 years, it's devastating. Everyone's just shaking their heads saying, how can this happen? How can this happen?
Sharon's death was a big loss for our community. She had known so many people through her work, through her friends, and to not have her in the community anymore, that always creates a hole. Everybody spoke well of her.
She was beloved by the people in the community. We didn't know where to start looking, so we tried to determine anything potentially that could have happened. Is it a close friend that got into an argument with her? Is it a neighbor that maybe didn't like her?
The day after the murder, police canvass Sharon's neighborhood.
They questioned almost everybody that knew Sharon about, have you heard anything? Do you have any information that can help us? And I said, I have no idea. No idea. She had no enemies. Nobody had a clue who would do something like that. It has to be someone that we don't know. I mean, it has to be someone that came from town.
While we don't have a lot of violent crime in the area, there was definitely one family that lived right behind Sharon that came to mind as somebody that could have been concerning.
The investigators had made contact with Jim Mars. He was an individual that would get into trouble here and there.
He wasn't real responsible. He associated with people that were involved in minor crimes such as burglaries, drug use.
I asked what his relationship with Sharon was, and basically it was just an acquaintance. Mr. Mars would see her occasionally outside of her house when he was going to the post office or on Main Street. They would say hi. He said he got in trouble by her a couple times for mischief when he was younger, and she would yell at him.
When we interviewed Jim Mars, he didn't know anything about Sharon's death, and he was so sorry that she died.
Jim had been in Kansas doing a roofing job. After he got back from Kansas, he eventually went to Wahoo, drank some beer with a friend, attempted to go to another bar. At that time, it was after closing time, and he drove the back roads home to Colon. He estimated he got home about 1:30 in the morning. Stayed up, watched TV, drank a pop, and then eventually went to bed.
His mom confirmed the time that he came home. Everything seemed to be okay with his story.
Investigators don't know the exact time of Sharon's death, so the 24-year-old remains on the suspect list. Before police leave, Jim gives them a tip.
Jim had indicated that there was a trucker that always had interactions and always seemed to be bickering with Miss Erickson. The truck driver may have parked a little bit on her property and she'd get upset about it. He might have his engine running on his truck and it would bother her.
And she would bring it to his attention, and he would not necessarily comply with her request.
It was no secret the two didn't get along.
We were gaining information from friends that Sharon had had disputes with this man.
Detectives must now determine if a run-in with the trucker turned fatal.
A lot of the community members felt that the truck driver was doing things to antagonize her and to cause more problems between them.
That was something that was public because there had been some shouting matches, some vocal exchanges about the fact that this truck was running all night.
Some of the people in the community who knew that he wasn't overly fond with Sharon, they kind of rumored him to be a suspect.
Maybe the frustration amongst the two had just finally boiled over. It just seemed suspicious.
I know the investigators had attempted to reach out to the truck driver in question and were unable to contact him.
Police do all they can, but can't track down the driver's whereabouts.
Today's technology is there's cameras everywhere. You're using your cell phone. At the time of this homicide, that kind of technology wasn't prevalent.
We didn't know if we were going to find that person.
Is Sharon Erickson's murderer on the run?
That's concerning, and that was on the minds of probably all the citizens in this area. And probably the scariest thing for law enforcement in the community is that person likely to offend again?
Police hunting the killer of 66-year-old Sharon Erickson have a new suspect, a truck driver she had clashed with several times.
Had something escalated from vocal argument to some other level.
Now, detectives fear the trucker has fled the area.
We went door to door, asked people if they saw the truck driver. No one had any information about him, and it didn't appear we were any further along than we were the night we got there, and the town was on high alert.
There's a murderer out there. It's hard to cop that play. Hard to cop that play.
A week after Sharon's murder, detectives received the autopsy results.
The report did indicate that the death would have occurred sometime, most likely that night or the early morning hours of the day that she was found.
The medical examiner indicated that there was no gunshot wounds, that the gun had not been used in the commission of the crime.
The pathologist ruled the cause of death to be asphyxiation along with blunt force trauma.
It was found that Sharon had been beaten pretty severely. She had also been strangled. She also suffered some broken ribs and had some defensive wounds on her hands from fighting off her attacker.
The autopsy contains one more disturbing detail.
She had a small vaginal tear as well, which indicated that she'd been sexually assaulted. I was definitely shocked that there was a sexual assault involved.
Totally unexpected. It added a new twist to the crime, which further led to more questions. It really makes you feel for the victim. She had to have been terrified for those few minutes that she struggled at the end of her life.
During the autopsy, her underwear were taken for possible examination for DNA. This being pretty early in the DNA process in the early 2000s, we waited.
2 days later, on July 10th, the trucker is back in town and police bring him in for questioning.
He's not overly cooperative. He was reluctant to give any details about where he was, what he was doing.
Detectives press the trucker on his relationship with Sharon.
The truck driver wouldn't have called Sharon a friend. He felt irritated by the way she would overreact, I believe is how he termed it.
He did not have a good relationship with her.
But the truck driver vows he's no killer.
He told us he was out of town at the time of the homicide. He was in Wyoming or Colorado. He was hundreds of miles away and had receipts to prove it. Officers were sent off to corroborate the receipt. He was asked for a DNA sample and a polygraph, and he refused.
Was the trucker hiding something?
It's just one of the things that you can add to a list of items that if there's too many on that list, it's a problem.
With nothing concrete linking the trucker to the homicide, detectives have to let him go.
Law enforcement officers were in the process of interviewing and chasing down alibis.
We'd been following up with people, but there was not a lot of new information coming in and not a lot of credible information.
With Sharon's murder still unsolved, the community remains on high alert.
Before this happened, it was probably one of the safest places you'd want to be. Everyone's on their toes. You know, you drive up, you lock your car, you lock your house, you watch everything. There's a lady that just retired, 60-some years old. Who could do this? It just was a shock to the whole county.
As a community, you want resolution, or you at least want to know why it happened and how can we get some justice out of this.
Although the entire town is mourning the loss of Sharon, Rick Hartman seems to be taking an unnaturally keen interest in the investigation.
Rick would ask us about what we were doing about other leads, and then he would insert his thoughts.
His behavior was a little more pushy, trying to get as much information as Rick could.
Is this just a concerned friend who wants to see how the investigation's going, or is there something more to than that?
Despite his odd behavior, Rick still has a solid alibi, and the investigation stalls.
We decided that we all needed to get back together and just have like a brainstorm session and say, what do we do? One of the things that we talked about is at the time of the homicide, early 2000s, meth had been a problem.
People would steal anhydrous ammonia from tanks and then use that to create their own methamphetamine.
Some of these people were heavy addicts, very dangerous, and involved in a lot of crimes.
One of the things that was being discussed with the anhydrous tanks was they were not too far from Sharon's home. So could she have seen something? Could she have spotted something, said something to make someone believe that she knew who they were and what they were doing?
Did Sharon confront them? Did they attack her to keep her quiet?
We might be looking for somebody who's manufacturing and selling methamphetamine who may have been in Colon on that particular night.
"5 weeks after Sharon Erickson is savagely beaten to death, detectives investigate whether she had been killed by a criminal gang manufacturing illegal drugs near her home.
It's an easy target, no cameras in that area. We were aware that Sharon kept an eye on Main Street. She a lot of times had information about suspicious people, something going on after hours there.
Sharon was one that if she saw something that she didn't think was right, she wasn't afraid to stand up and say something.
Maybe she saw something that she shouldn't have. She interrupted a burglary or a theft. As we talked to people around town, they also indicated that that might have been one of the reasons why Sharon may have been murdered.
Investigators had talked to local suspects who were involved in the manufacturing of methamphetamine. People that we had arrested previous to this incident, and then people from the metro areas. Most of them have pretty extensive criminal records, and they're heavily addicted. So the level of cooperation with somebody who's addicted to methamphetamine is not going to be very good.
It creates a difficult picture to paint. We were not able to generate the type of evidence or leads that we really would hope for.
We as a department were frustrated with things not happening real fast and the way that you always want.
The canvas fails to yield the information police were looking for, as does the investigation into the trucker.
As the investigation unfolded, the truck driver was eliminated. He was miles and miles away from the incident. We contacted the establishment where he got fuel, and it wasn't a phony receipt.
With this, the driver is fully off the suspect list.
After doing the first set of interviews and looking at potential suspects, the investigators really weren't able to focus on anybody that would be so mad or somebody that would want to sexually assault Sharon or to kill her. So it kind of left a lot of question marks. Where do you go? What do you look for? There's just a lot of unknowns.
We just don't know what's going on. Do we feel safe or do we need to worry?
Everybody had their ideas who did this, and I think it just kept going and going and going. People didn't have a clue, but they wanted to talk about it.
There was a lot of discussion amongst the community members as to what was going on. A lot of rumors floating around.
One of these rumors that starts circulating has to do with one of Sharon's good friends and a familiar name to detectives.
Because of Rick's close contact with Sharon, small town rumors began to surface that there may have been more than just a friendship there.
Many of the community members had mentioned rumors that Rick Hartman and Sharon had been having an affair.
We start to wonder, was there more to their friendship, maybe in a romantic way?
There was talk. This was something that was being discussed. So it's not that hard of a thought process or big of a leap to say, could he be involved?
Police talked to Rick again, this time at the sheriff's office.
He was cooperative. He somehow, I think, liked the attention.
But that changes when detectives ask Rick some very pointed questions.
Law enforcement actually asked him if there was a romantic relationship between the two of them.
He was immediately offended, and he denied that.
Mr. Hartman appeared to be very distraught. He said he was just friends with her, that there was no romantic relationship.
Could the sexual assault that appeared in Sharon's autopsy actually have been a consensual encounter with Rick?
That question certainly seems accusatory. Those things are not comfortable, but that comes with the job. You got to do your job. Rick was questioned in detail and really scrutinized on where he was, what his involvement was. There were a number of times he said, we got to look somewhere else because we were wasting our time on him.
He became agitated and wanted to go home.
Rick stands by the alibi he gave police back when they first questioned him 7 weeks ago at the crime scene.
Rick was home with his wife at the time that we believe Sharon was killed.
The investigators went and corroborated his story with his wife again.
We really had no reason to believe that Rick's wife would not disclose if he were gone at that time. Even though there were a lot of things that kind of pointed to him, he had a pretty good alibi.
With no hard evidence against Rick, detectives have to let him go, but not before getting one thing.
We collected DNA from Mr. Hartman.
We talked a little about it, and he says, but Don, I didn't do it. But again, you always have that doubt, what happened?
There was just speculation and suspicion.
2 months after Sharon's murder, detectives finally receive results from the forensics lab.
They had tried to do analysis on some of the items which were collected at autopsy to come up with a DNA profile.
Will this be the break detectives have been hoping for?
We were really needing something such as that to come through for us.
Months after the murder of Sharon Erickson, police hope the DNA results they've been waiting for will confirm who they suspect is her killer.
There was quite a bit of speculation that it could be the postmaster in town.
We were contacted by our State Patrol lab. They believed that there was something there, but that they could not separate out a complete profile for comparison. It was kind of frustrating to know that there may be something there, but that maybe it was a dead end that we couldn't get past.
Without a DNA match, we as investigators knew that if that was the case, it would be very hard to solve this crime.
But detectives aren't giving up.
The Nebraska Medical Center could test smaller quantities than the State Patrol lab could do. So we made the determination that we would take our evidence and send it in to the other lab and have more DNA testing done.
Results will take months to come back, and with a killer still on the loose, nerves in small-town Colon, Nebraska begin to fray.
When the investigation went on and on and on, I thought, come on, we've got to find something. We had a murder back in 69 or 68 that was never solved in Wahoo. And of course, right away, you think, gosh, we got to find out who did this.
Could it be someone we do know? There can be a mistrust. All of a sudden you realize, maybe I don't know all my neighbors.
Then, police receive an unexpected tip that points back to the man they can't seem to rule out.
The estate of Sharon Erickson had a garage sale, and Rick Hartman was at the garage sale.
Mr. Hartman went in and purchased her mattress, and that was suspicious to us. If there was some sort of maybe DNA evidence or something that would be on the mattress that would be of interest to law enforcement by somebody purchasing that and maybe getting rid of it, then it would be something that we would no longer be able to go back and utilize at a later time.
Did he want the mattress because they did have potential sexual activity on the mattress? Maybe he was out there trying to hide additional evidence. Every time investigators seemed to close a loophole with Mr. Hartman, something else happened. He kept drawing attention to him. It was just another thing that brought him back on radar.
Law enforcement asked him about his attendance there and what he bought. He actually denied that he bought her mattress. So then that caused law enforcement some concern on why would you buy it? Okay, why, if you did buy it, why would you lie about it?
Mr. Hartman agreed to undergo a polygraph, so he cooperated in that aspect, but he seemed nervous, on edge, jittery. The results from that polygraph were inconclusive. It left a lot of questions unanswered. It just added a little fuel to the fire.
Every chance that we could get that he could clear his name seemed to be something that elevated him to the next level.
The people in town were thinking it had to be him and were scared to go to the post office.
In a small community where pretty much everybody knows everybody, it's easy to point fingers, it's easy to cast doubts.
I golfed with Rick Hartman that week in our golf league, and he was just nervous. He was just edgy and just scared.
A number of us may have felt like Mr. Hartman had acted inappropriately or suspiciously. We just didn't have enough to really push it over the top.
There was nothing that we could charge him with. We had no evidence that he committed the crime, other than he kept interjecting himself in the investigation.
Detectives hope that definitive proof will come from the Medical Center Forensic Lab.
The last piece that we didn't have back yet was the DNA evidence.
We got a phone call, and they were able to isolate a DNA profile.
They actually located a sperm cell on her clothing, which was a positive breakthrough for us. The only person that it could have been from would have been the person that had sexually assaulted her and presumably killed her.
We felt that there was more hope in solving this than we had had for quite a while, because at least DNA is something that we can link to a specific person.
Armed with this DNA profile, police immediately zero in on their top suspect.
We did send in Rick Hartman's DNA. Came back not a match.
Rick's name is finally cleared from the suspect list once and for all.
Scientific evidence is what it is. It confirmed everything that he was telling us. There was no romantic relationship.
We were focused on an individual that had absolutely nothing to do with the homicide. I apologize for any stress we caused him or his family.
But if it wasn't Rick, then who killed Sharon?
One of the big concerns that we had is that if this was a stranger that was maybe passing through town or someone completely not associated with the community or with Sharon, that it potentially could go unsolved without any additional evidence coming forward.
Investigators are back to square one, but they come up with a new game plan.
We try to determine who else should we go out and collect samples from, who else were potential suspects, who could have done this, and who would provide those samples so we can send them in and see if there's a match.
It was just a matter of being able to find that one person out there in the world that belonged to. We're trying to get that needle in a haystack.
10 months after Sharon's murder, in April 2004, police get the results of their DNA dragnet.
The lab got a confirmation that they had a match.
We now know who killed Sharon. It was the breakthrough that we needed.
It sent shockwaves through the entire area.
Almost a year after the murder of Sharon Erickson, police have matched DNA from the crime scene to her killer.
The DNA came back and it matched Jim Mars.
James lived nearby to Sharon. He was one of the people that police talked to early on.
Jim had known Sharon nearly all his life.
He had helped her out when he was younger, doing some yard work or snow removal.
I was kind of speechless at first because he had no problem providing his DNA to law enforcement.
I was shocked to find out that James Mars was the perpetrator. We had never seen that type of violence out of him.
Once we had a DNA match with Jim, we needed to figure out where the holes in his alibi are.
When we originally interviewed Jim Mars, he said he'd been out in a bar in Wahoo and later went home. The bartender believed the timeline that Jim had given us was fairly accurate.
Jim's mother stands by her story, too.
I think those alibis were solid, but they didn't cover him for the whole evening. What I think happened is he was home and left. He lived right across the back alley from Sharon's house. And even if he would have been home, that doesn't mean he didn't leave his house. The determination was that we did have enough evidence to proceed with the arrest and prosecution of Jim.
We went to his residence very early in the morning, and he answered the door, and we placed him under arrest. He was shocked that he was being arrested, that he was considered the suspect. We brought him in to interview him.
Police try to establish a motive.
That was one of the unique things in this case, to find out and even just try to resolve that big why. Why would that even happen?
He was reluctant to give any details. There were a number of times he said, "I don't remember." He sobbed at times.
He said he didn't have anything to do with it, denied that he had any involvement. When asked about the sexual assault, he stated that Sharon was an old lady and he wouldn't do that. And from that point on, he stated he wanted an attorney, and we stopped our questioning.
We had filed charges for first-degree homicide, sexual assault.
News of his arrest hits the community hard.
This was very unexpected. I thought, my gosh, something's wrong here. I mean, You just can't believe it. I was hoping that they'd catch someone that I did not know the family.
The reaction in town was split. There was definitely a thought that, oh, it couldn't have been him that did it. And then there were supporters that, well, we thought maybe it was him.
While investigators are confident that DNA evidence will be enough to get a conviction, they get even more ammunition against Jim.
We had at least 5 inmates come forward with information that Mr. Mars had confessed to them. That he struck her, strangled her, killed her. These inmates were going to testify against him, that he had confessed to them.
With this information, investigators piece together what happened the night of the murder.
Jim was at the bar, like he said. He had a few too many drinks at some point. Went home. He wasn't able to sleep.
From what he told the other inmates, he was looking for some money. He thought Sharon may be an easy target. He was just going to burglarize her house.
He climbed over Sharon's fence in the backyard, cut her phone line so she wouldn't be able to call anybody, pried her back door open, and ended up kicking the door in order to go see if he could find her purse or find some money that was laying around.
Once that back door was kicked in, Sharon woke up.
He was confronted by Sharon, who was holding a gun and threatened to shoot him at that point if he didn't leave.
Sharon went to call 911 and her phone line was dead. She kept her cell phone in her car for emergencies.
Sharon ran across the street to get into her car. Jim chased her down, caught her, and ended up attacking her.
He punched her and then eventually choked her to death.
There was a sexual assault. He refused to talk to the inmates about that.
Had he not sexually assaulted her and we didn't have any DNA, we would never have it solved when you have a sperm cell that was a perfect match. There's nobody else that could be responsible.
The chance of this being another person was out of this world. With the evidence we had, this was a slam dunk for his conviction.
On August 15th, 2005, Jim Mars pleads guilty to second-degree murder. He is sentenced to life with no possibility of parole.
When I found out there was a sexual assault that went along with the slaying, I was just furious. What kind of person would do something like this? You've got to be kidding me. And the community was appalled. I was happy that we finally got closure. He did it. He's locked up.
Sharon was the one that suffered the ultimate loss. And that's what the investigators put in all those hours of work for and give her last voice.
Sharon's presence is missed in Colon to this day.
To not have her in the community, that's tough. There's pain and sadness.
Sharon loved her community. Yes, she did. She was very good to my kids and very good to me and my family. Really a good lady.
A vibrant, outgoing young mother of 3.
She was so full of life. She had so many friends, and she was a very, happy person.
Murdered in the safety of her own home.
The victim had been stabbed multiple times in the chest area.
It looked like somebody had tried to carve her heart right from her body.
Investigators discover a history of troubled romances.
He drank incessantly. It caused a lot of problems.
He had repeatedly been trying to get more visitation with his son, and he was really upset about it.
He was just furious that she was having a baby.
However, as time progressed, the leads started drying up.
Just when police think they might never catch the killer.
The police were contacted by a young woman.
And she said, "Hey, I've got this inkling in my stomach. Can you check out this person?"
New evidence leads to a culprit no one saw coming.
When I walked out of that house, I said to myself, my God, he did this.
His rage, his obsession just consumed him.
How could someone commit such a horrific, violent attack and continue to live among us for another 8 years?
Less than an hour outside Minneapolis, Big Lake, Minnesota feels like a world away from the bustling city. But in February of 1992, this peaceful town is rocked by a horrific discovery.
911 dispatch. What's the problem? My wife is dead. I just came home, and my little girl is here, and she's in the bedroom, and she's been stabbed. I got the 2 kids here. My God, what's happened? Is she breathing? No, she's dead. She's cold. Oh, my God. Oh, my God.
The caller, Charlie Jensen, says the victim is his wife, 39-year-old mother of 3, Linda Jensen.
At about 4:18 p.m., I received a call in my office from my lieutenant who indicated that a homicide occurred in Big Lake Township.
While patrol officers take Charlie and the 2 children away from the home, detectives arrive and begin their investigation.
When I entered the scene, I entered the bedroom, saw the victim lying at the foot of the bed face up, ascertained obviously that that person was dead.
She was naked. She had a comforter over her body with a large knife pinning the comforter to her body, having been stabbed right through her chest. The victim had been stabbed not just once, multiple times in the chest area.
There was some dried blood on the corner of her mouth. The individual was cold to the touch. The victim appeared to be dead for quite some time.
Even for seasoned detectives, the viciousness of the attack is shocking.
I thought it was a horrific overkill with the knife.
It looked like somebody had tried to carve her heart right from her body.
My theory was the perpetrator was really angry with the individual, and that's why he had stabbed her in such a heinous way. The knife appeared to be like a kitchen steak knife. It was later ascertained that the knife itself had been taken from a butcher block in the kitchen of the residence.
After finishing up with the body, investigators examine the rest of the home for clues.
There was nothing that appeared to be out of place whatsoever. The house may have been a little on the messy side, but there was no signs of any of the drawers being opened, nothing being disturbed. I observed that there was no sign of a forced entry.
It was really actually kind of a clean crime scene, other than the homicide itself. No fingerprints, no blood samples.
As detectives continue searching for evidence, news of Linda's murder reaches her family.
I got a phone call from Charlie, and he said, "We lost Linda. Linda's dead. She's been murdered." I was screaming. Just screamed and screamed and screamed because she was gone. And I didn't want to believe it.
Born in a Minneapolis suburb in 1952, Linda had 3 siblings.
Linda was my dark-haired sister. Beautiful, beautiful sister. She was so full of life. Linda was the person that you find climbing a tree. She loved to swim. She just would go, go, go.
Linda's boundless energy continued into her adult years.
Linda loved to go speed skating. She loved to run and loved to jog and, do everything to keep herself in shape.
In 1971, Linda married her childhood sweetheart, Charlie.
My folks would rent a cabinette every year, and it happened to be Charlie's parents' cabin resort. And that's how Linda and Charlie met. Then when they first got married, Charlie and Linda were so much in love.
Their first child, Andrew, was born in 1973.
She was, so excited, to have a little boy. She was so happy.
But the fairy tale marriage didn't last.
They were married for 7 years. When she filed for divorce, it came, out that they were getting divorced. It was because of his drinking.
4 years later, while in a new relationship, Linda gave birth to her second son, Joey. But then, in 1990, Linda and Charlie reunited.
Linda still loved Charlie, and Charlie still loved Linda. They remarried on April 4th, 1991, which would have been their 20th wedding anniversary. She was so happy. She was so content. And then she had Lisa on June 12th of 91.
As Linda, Charlie, and the 3 children settled down in Big Lake, their future looked bright.
She just loved it in Big Lake. They had a few acreages. She was so together with her life. She had so many friends, and she was a very happy person.
Now, Linda's loved ones are left asking who took her life so viciously and why.
They were very devastated about what occurred to her, and so we wanted to solve this case as quickly as possible. They no longer have a mother or a spouse, and it was a very, very tragic case indeed.
Having established a clear picture of their victim, detectives turn their attention to Linda's husband, Charlie.
Usually in an investigation, especially a homicide investigation, you usually look at the person closest to the victim. Charlie appeared very upset about the situation, but he was coherent and he was able to give us information.
When investigators ask Charlie about the day of the murder, he tells them it was an ordinary day. He went to work that morning, while Linda stayed home with the baby.
At about 9:45 in the morning, he called Linda and he received no answer. By noon, he called the 3rd time and again received no answer. Charlie was a little upset because he thought she would be home, so he left work and he arrives at his residence at about 4:05.
When Charlie walked in the door, he found 9-year-old Joey and 8-month-old Lisa alone in the house.
Joey, who was now home from school, doing homework at a table, and then he saw that Lisa was still in the playpen, wearing the same clothing that she was when he left that morning, and he thought this was not right because there's no way that Linda would have left the baby in the same clothing all day long. So he went downstairs to the laundry room to look for her. He could not find her. He went back into the bedroom again and went further into the bedroom where he then observed Linda lying on the floor. He indicated to me that the comforter was higher up on her body, and he apparently pulled it down. He also indicated that he touched the knife, and so he said if his fingerprints would have appeared on the knife, that is his reason.
That would be an immediate red flag. That would have caused investigators to focus right on Charlie.
As an investigator, you say, well, my God, that's something we got to look at a little deeper.
Investigators also knew their early relationship was a volatile relationship. They did find their way back to each other, but their relationship certainly was rocky.
You always assume that perhaps the spouse is the person that perpetrated the crime, and he was right at the top of the list.
Coming up, investigators get a promising lead.
She saw a man in a pickup truck pulling out of the driveway
and uncover sinister motives.
Would it be possible for him to hire someone to kill Linda?
He became this person that she was afraid of.
After a suspect is caught in a lie.
He claimed he didn't know who she was.
He was asked to give a DNA sample and he refused.
The case takes a jaw-dropping turn.
The family were outraged. You could feel the chill in the courtroom.
No way in hell. No way could that happen.
Police are investigating the brutal murder of 39-year-old mother of 3, Linda Jensen. Their first suspect is Linda's husband, Charlie, who has just admitted his fingerprints are likely on the murder weapon.
He indicated that he touched the knife. He never pulled it out, but he did touch the knife by the handle.
Is Charlie trying to cover his tracks? Searching for a possible motive, detectives ask why he and Linda divorced 14 years ago.
Charlie indicated that they had a good relationship. The only reason that the marriage broke up was simply because of his drinking.
Before Linda and Charlie got married, the first marriage, Charlie got sent to Vietnam. What he went through in Vietnam always stayed with him, and he got into heavy drinking because of that.
He drank incessantly. It caused a lot of problems in the marriage. So eventually, by 1978, Linda sought a divorce.
When Linda and Charlie remarried in 1991, Charlie had stopped drinking, but other demons remained.
Charlie had, really kind of given up his partying and he became more of an adult. But yet, what he went through in Vietnam always stayed with him.
Had Charlie's old issues returned, this time with fatal consequences? Investigators get to work checking Charlie's alibi.
Charlie indicated that he left the residence at about 6:15 a.m. to go to work, and he proceeded back to his residence at about 4:05 p.m. We retraced his steps, and we talked to a fellow coworker who verified the time that Charlie had arrived at work and the time that he left, and no time during that day did he ever leave.
Before detectives let Charlie go, they take a sample of his DNA.
At that time, we could do a little bit of DNA testing, but it hadn't reached the point where it could identify a suspect positively. So the investigative team was collecting DNA samples and then preserving it.
Charlie was also asked to do a polygraph test, which he did. He passed the polygraph test and was eliminated as a suspect.
Everything he said was down to the wire. He could not have been the perpetrator in this crime based on the timeline.
While investigators search for their next suspect, news of the murder leaves Big Lake residents fearful.
This crime was a shock to the community. It was a smaller community and, they didn't have many homicides. To think that somebody is still out there walking the street and you don't know who, what would be worse?
Your house is supposed to be your safety, and to know that she was murdered in her house, that somebody decided to play God and take her life. Who could do that?
24 hours into the investigation, detectives receive their first tip.
The investigative team got a call from a rural mail carrier who had claimed that she had been by the Jensen house on the day of the homicide.
The mail carrier arrived at the house at around 11:30 that morning, and she said at the time she saw a man in a pickup truck pulling out of the driveway, and she said she got a pretty good description of the man.
The postal worker described the truck as an older truck. I believe it was tan, two-tone tan, and it was occupied by a Caucasian male, late 30s, early 40s, kind of a scruffy guy with a beard.
We had a sketch artist that was involved in trying to recreate the picture of that person that the mail carrier supposedly saw.
The sheriff's office did release that sketch to the media, and it was widely publicized.
While investigators wait for witnesses to identify the driver of the truck, officers are sent door to door around Linda's home.
At this point, he had no leads whatsoever, so that was the first place we started looking at was the neighborhood itself. And I've had cases in the past that were solved by people that observed something.
On this canvas in particular, we were looking to see if any of the neighbors had seen anything or seen a truck or anything suspicious that morning.
When detectives hear that Linda's neighbors, the Jones family, may have seen the pickup truck, they immediately knock on their door.
Kent Jones was a scout leader. We had 4 children. We're hoping that he could name the person that the mail carrier observed leaving the Jensen residence.
And at the time, he told us he was at home and his wife was present, and he didn't know Linda Jensen.
Deborah Jones confirms that she has seen the pickup truck around the neighborhood, but neither she nor her husband can identify the man seen driving the vehicle.
We went through the entire neighborhood asking the same people basically the same questions, but no one really knew the guy in the truck. So we were really disappointed.
Detectives decide to turn their attention toward the other men from Linda's love life.
After Linda and Charlie divorced in 1978, Linda became involved with an individual by the name of Robert Beard. Linda had a child with him, Joey, and they were together for about 4 years before they separated.
Bob Beard really didn't see much of Joey and was really not a father figure, and, he never paid child support.
He had given up custody, but Bob Beard had repeatedly been trying to get more visitation, and sometimes he wouldn't see the kid but once or twice a year, and he was really upset about it.
When investigators speak to Linda's husband, Charlie, about Bob Beard, what he tells them is startling.
Charlie indicated to investigators that Mr. Beard had actually contacted Linda at least twice, if not more, within a few weeks before she was murdered. Bob wanted to see Joey and perhaps even gain custody of him.
Had Bob confronted Linda about custody and attacked her in a rage?
The individual that perpetrated this crime was angry at her about something.
Bob Beard was an absolute ideal suspect.
Detectives investigating the murder of Linda Jensen suspect she may have been killed by her ex, Bob Beard, in a battle over custody of their son, Joey.
During the investigation, we learned that Linda had been with the guy, and he was kind of a bad actor. According to the family, Linda was concerned about Bob due to his anger issues and the fact that he was drinking and using drugs.
Did Linda and Bob's dispute turn fatal? Detectives bring Bob in for an interview.
I questioned him, when were you last in contact with Linda Jensen? And he indicated, God, it'd been a long time. So I confronted him with what Charlie had said, and he denied it. He said, no, I haven't been in contact with her.
If he was giving false information, that would make him look very suspicious as a possible perpetrator.
Investigators asked Bob where he was the day Linda was murdered.
During the interview, he admitted that that day of Linda's homicide, that he'd been at home alone and had no alibi other than that. I was home alone, he said.
Beard told investigators that he had no car and that he wouldn't be able to walk to her residence.
After providing this information, he then lawyered up, indicated that he would not speak unless his lawyer was present, so that was very frustrating. Usually when a person wants a lawyer present, that usually indicates to us that they have something to hide.
Bob remains on the suspect list, but with no concrete evidence tying him to Linda's murder, police are forced to let him go. As they continue their investigation, detectives hope the autopsy report will provide a much-needed break.
During the autopsy, they determined that she'd been strangled and that subsequently she'd been also stabbed through the chest. But the cause of death, more than likely, was the strangulation.
It was also found that she had been sexually assaulted, and then there was a DNA swab taken at that time. She was perhaps being strangled during the time that she was being sexually assaulted, and then she was probably stabbed post-mortem, in other words, after death.
Medical examiners also determined Linda's time of death was between 8 a.m. and 10 a.m.
Charlie left the home at 6:45 a.m. About an hour later, the 9-year-old son left the home at about 7:45. That left just Linda Jensen at home with her infant child.
Those who knew her talked about the fact that she would have fought for her life, and so it probably was a very, very violent two-way encounter that probably lasted for a little while.
Somebody committed this horrible sexual assault and a nasty homicide, and they're walking around and they got away with it. That's unacceptable.
Convinced Linda was murdered by someone with a personal motive, investigators look at another one of Linda's romantic partners.
According to Charlie, after Linda left Robert Beard, she met an individual by the name of John Solomon.
When I first met John Solomon, I didn't like him. He just kind of acted like he was God's gift to women, but that's who she, really cared about, and she did marry him in '86.
After the wedding, John convinced Linda to move to California, but their newlywed bliss quickly faded.
Linda had only been out in California for a short period of time when things were getting kind of rough. A few times when Linda had called, I could tell that she was sad when we would talk. He completely, changed and became this person that she, I think, was a little afraid of. And he wanted Linda to have a child. And Linda knew that she just could not do that. So she convinced him that he should adopt Joey, and that's how she got out of having to have a baby with him.
Over the next few years, John's behavior became more troubling.
There was one particular time where Mr. Silliman had hit Linda, and they had a major fight.
Linda realized she had to get out of that relationship, and she left and came back to Minnesota.
At this point in time, Charlie was sober, and Linda actually wanted to get back together with him again because, as they said, they always loved each other. When Linda left Mr. Silliman, Linda requested that Mr. Silliman provide child support for Joey. And this was a real bone of contention with him because he felt that she had talked him into adopting him. And then after he adopts Joey, she leaves him, and then he is stuck with the child support.
A judge orders John to pay Linda $300 a month. But then, John receives even more shocking news.
Linda got pregnant with Lisa, and when the divorce papers came to John, and it did have to state in the divorce papers that she was pregnant, but it wasn't his child. He was just furious that she was having a baby with Charlie, and she wouldn't have one with him.
Did Linda's news push John over the edge?
He'd made several phone calls, we were told, that weren't too pleasant with Linda. So he was a potential suspect. Could he have come back and committed this homicide?
Four days after the shocking murder of Linda Jensen, police have learned her abusive ex-husband, John Silliman, was enraged over her child support demands and news of her pregnancy with another man. Did his resentment lead him to kill? Police fly to California to interview him.
When I interviewed him regarding the abuse, he indicated it was a two-way street, that they both abused each other. They fought all the time. They fought over money. They fought over Joey to a certain degree, and they just did not get along at all.
John had motive to want Linda dead, but investigators need to know if he had the opportunity.
During the time of the murder, John would have been working at the elementary school in King City, California. And according to the people we spoke with at the school, he never left the school that entire day.
You know, when you're looking at an alibi on any potential suspect, nothing's black and white with it, but the Silliman alibi, it was airtight.
Even though John's alibi checks out, investigators still believe he could be involved in Linda's murder.
There's a sense that hits you about someone's demeanor, and it might be a look in their eye.
After visiting with him, the question came up, would it be possible for him to hire someone to come up and kill Linda? He would still have an alibi being at school, but someone else could have done the crime.
Detectives scour John's finances, looking for any evidence he paid for a hit.
But upon reviewing all his bank records, we could not find anything that would have revealed that he had done such a thing.
With John eliminated from the investigation, detectives are back to the drawing board. Desperate for leads, they make a public appeal for information.
We set up a tip line at the Sheriff's Department, and we received in excess of approximately 1,000 calls.
And I think at that point, officers were hoping for just something, anything, that they could use to get them back on track. And maybe somebody looked suspicious, said something suspicious.
Every tip that came in was followed up on as best we could, because you never know when the correct tip is going to be the one that solves the crime. However, as time progressed, the leads started drying up. The family was quite upset. They wanted it solved. We also wanted it solved, but it was very, very difficult to do when you have no further leads coming in.
With no new suspects on their radar, by May 1992, the case grinds to a halt.
It's very difficult when you have a case that goes cold. There's a lot of sacrifice on behalf of the officers involved doing the investigation. They're away from their homes, their families. It can affect you quite drastically.
What could I have missed? And it's just troubling. You don't sleep, you don't rest.
I would call the Sheriff's Department many times a week. I never stopped I was not going away until this was solved, because I had promised Linda, looking at her in her coffin, till my dying breath, that I would do all I could to find the person that did this, to get this person in jail.
7 years pass, and in 1999, Linda's family persuades a new sheriff to reignite the investigation.
Because of Sandy's insistence opening the case, Sheriff Anderson at the time decided to take a second look at the case.
To start, police offer a reward for new information.
Sometimes in these cases, over time, people who have information that they didn't provide early on can feel more comfortable to come forward. Sometimes they get that nagging feeling that, what I thought was nothing 10 years ago maybe actually means something.
I had all the newspapers and all the TV station contacts, and I would call them and they would put something on, because I kept saying, somebody has the key. You might think it's insignificant, but let it out. It might be the key to solve this.
Detectives also revisit key evidence from the initial investigation, including the DNA samples.
When this case reopened, the situation with DNA had changed greatly. There was a database to compare the samples to. Also, when obtaining a sample, it took less time to get a response back.
Investigators always collect DNA samples of family members and anybody with close ties. We did go back and look at potential suspects.
Investigators compared DNA from Linda's sexual assault to samples from her former romantic partners, Bob Beer, Charlie Jensen, and John Silliman, as well as a database of known sex offenders. When the results come back, detectives are stunned.
Investigators took between 80 and 85 DNA samples for testing, and they ruled everybody out. All of the men that she had been involved with in consensual relationships had been eliminated as possible suspects in the homicide.
Yeah, it just kind of dropped me right down. I've worked a lot of homicides, but we had nothing going except here we have this woman who's deceased, been a homicide and rape victim.
It's like, who could have done this? I wanted justice for Linda.
The case goes cold again for another year. But in 2000, police receive an unexpected tip from a woman named Angela Hennon that turns the investigation red hot.
Angela called the sheriff's office and said, hey, I've got this inkling in my stomach and I've had it for years. Can you check out this person?
That was the first lead the police had in over 8 years.
She called in that little piece that we needed. We've been wanting for over 8 years. That broke the case wide open.
Police investigating the 1992 cold case homicide of Linda Jensen have just received their first tip in 8 years. Detectives are stunned when caller Angela Hennon points them to someone familiar.
Angela identified herself as a prior acquaintance of Kent Jones.
Kent Jones was the local Boy Scout leader in the community. Angela Hennon had had an affair with Kent Jones right after the Linda Jensen homicide, and said she brought up to Kent Jones the Linda Jensen homicide, and he denied knowing her. And he became very angry and agitated about that subject coming up.
A few months later, Angela indicated that when she was talking to Mr. Jones, he indicated that he knew Linda quite well. He saw her jogging past his residence, he visited with her, and he basically changed the story completely from what he told her previously.
So she felt compelled to report that to the police because she just found it unusual. When investigators first spoke to Mr. Jones in 1992, he was not a suspect. He was just a neighbor.
He denied knowing her as well as perpetrating the crime itself. And his wife alibied him. She said that he had been home that entire day.
So, obtaining the information that Mr. Jones did in fact know Miss Jensen, at least collaterally, told investigators right away that he had been untruthful or deceptive with them.
Well, as an investigator hearing that type of a story, I would think that he has some involvement. There's something that is not right and needs to be followed up further.
Detectives dig into Kent Jones's background.
At the time of the killing, Jones was the leader of the local Boy Scout troop, church-going family. He and his wife Deborah had kids. Certainly the persona of him was that he was a fun-loving, good-natured, well-liked guy.
But as they dug deeper, investigators opened up a different side to him, what he wants you to believe.
Mr. Jones had a lot of skeletons in his closet. Outwardly, he seemed like a family man, and inwardly, he had a very, very dark side to him. He had a criminal history. He rented a storage locker that one night caught on fire. Mr. Jones entered a claim to the insurance company, and as it turned out, he probably had about $35,000 worth of items in that locker and not several hundreds of thousands that he claimed. It was an overclaim, and he was subsequently investigated and charged with defrauding the insurance company.
Investigators then discover an even darker side to the father of four.
There'd been some suspicion that he'd been abusive with his wife in the past.
I read a report that Mrs. Jones had been stabbed.
She apparently slipped and fell onto the open dishwasher, and her body was pierced by a knife that had been put into the dishwasher handle down. And I think some people looked at that and wondered, did that really happen that way? That just doesn't make sense.
Investigators were very suspicious about those circumstances. She, however, stuck to that story and never pursued any charges against her husband.
If Mr. Jones was the person that stabbed her, this is in line with the same thing that happened to Linda Jensen, in that she was stabbed, and it shows that he has a propensity for violence.
Armed with the disturbing new profile of Kent, detectives pay him another visit, this time as a suspect.
They went back to re-interview him and asked him again if he knew Miss Jensen or knew anything about her. He claimed he knew nothing about her, didn't know who she was.
Present at that time was Kent Jones's wife, and she indicated, "No, don't you remember? She was here visiting you about Joey joining the Cub Scouts," and he got very angry with his wife at that point.
Caught in a lie, Kent changes his story.
He admitted that she used to jog by his house, and they had had conversations in the past. They also asked him point blank if he had had any kind of an affair or if he was involved sexually with Miss Jensen, and he became angry and very defensive.
At that point, he was asked to give a DNA sample, and he refused.
After 8 years of investigation, he was the first person to refuse to provide a DNA sample voluntarily. That, of course, raised another huge red flag.
When I walked out of that house, I said to myself, my God, he did this. I had such a strong feeling, but it's not evidence.
Officers went to the local district court judge and applied for a search warrant in order to obtain a DNA sample from Mr. Jones.
With their warrant in hand, investigators collect Kent Jones's DNA to compare to evidence from the crime scene.
Mr. Jones's sample of DNA was sent to the crime lab, and within a short period of time, we got the results back and the DNA matched.
It was a match on almost every level. There was no question that the DNA at the crime scene came from Mr. Jones.
Thank God they got him. I knew this son of a bitch did it. So I wanted him gone.
Sheriff Anderson called and he said that I want you to get everybody together. We are making the arrest after you're all here. When they said the name, we had no idea who this guy was. In those 8 years, I never thought I'd be a neighbor.
On July 25th, 2000, Kent Jones is arrested and charged with the first-degree murder of Linda Jensen. Despite the DNA match, Kent insists he's innocent.
You're going through scenarios with him to determine what he reacts to or bites on. And if we can get that confession, and none of those scenarios worked with him.
But the DNA was the connection. that allowed the case to go to the grand jury to indict Mr. Jones for the murder.
On May 31st, 2001, Kent Jones goes on trial.
Mr. Jones was indicted on 3 different charges. It was first-degree murder, it was second-degree intentional murder, and count 3 was criminal sexual conduct in the first degree.
How could someone who was involved in Boy Scouts, who was involved in his church, who seemingly was a good husband and good father, commit such a horrific, violent attack and continue to live among us for another 8 years? But people looked at the fact that there was a DNA match. They looked at the other evidence presented at the trial, and people thought, this guy really did it.
But when Kent Jones takes the stand, his testimony takes everyone by surprise.
There was a major development that caught literally everybody off guard. He got up on the stand and he told everybody something that just shocked the entire courtroom.
"9 years after Linda Jensen was raped and killed, neighbor Kent Jones is on trial for first-degree murder. But when Kent takes the stand, his defense stuns prosecutors.
Under oath, in court, in front of the jury, he testified that he had actually been having an affair with Linda Jensen.
Mr. Jones's defense was that he was having consensual sex with Linda, and that's why they found the DNA when they did the autopsy on Linda.
The family were outraged. You could feel the chill in the courtroom.
No way in hell. No way could that happen. He murdered my sister, and he's trying to murder her reputation. And how dare he?
And I had to tell the family, I am sorry, but this is Mr. Jones' day in court. The jury can disbelieve it if they want. That's up to them. But there's no way legally I could prevent him from presenting his defense.
Each time he changed his story from, I don't know her, to, oh yeah, I knew her because she jogged by my house, to, wait, we did meet once to talk about Boy Scouts, to, we had a consensual affair. It wasn't laughable, it was just sad.
The decision rests with the jury. On December 8th, 2001, they return their verdict. They find Kent Jones guilty on all 3 charges, and he is later sentenced to life in prison.
I think after all of that, there was a great sense of relief from the family that, you know what, we don't believe this. Thank God the jury didn't believe it either, and this guy is actually going to get what we've been looking for now for years.
After he was sentenced and he was taken out of the courtroom, the jurors came up and were giving us hugs. And you know, I'm thinking it's got to be over.
But less than 3 years later, Linda's family is dealt a sickening blow.
After Mr. Jones's conviction, he did file an appeal that went directly to the Minnesota Supreme Court. Mr. Jones and his attorneys wanted to present evidence of an alternative perpetrator, and the Supreme Court agreed with the defense, overturned the conviction, and resulted in us having to retry the case a second time.
From the time he was arrested, it was like 5-6 years that we've been going through court hearings. How much more does the justice system want this family to go through?
Once the Supreme Court's ruling came out, people started to question whether Jones was going to be released. Were they going to now have barriers at a second trial that might lead to a not guilty verdict?
In November 2006, Kent Jones stands trial again.
On the second trial, out of the blue, he decided he would name Charlie Jensen as the alternative suspect. He still claimed he was having an affair, but this time he testified that he had intercourse with Miss Jensen the morning of the murder.
Kent Jones claims that when Charlie arrived home and discovered the affair, he murdered Linda.
Everyone knew Mr. Jensen had an absolute ironclad alibi, confirmed and reconfirmed, and I thought Mr. Jensen was going to get up and start making a scene and yell or something, because I could see that look in his face. I could see it boiling up. And to his credit, he held his composure.
His lies just kept kept going farther and farther and farther into left field. And my fear was that it was going to drag on through the court system over and over and over.
The prosecution presents their theory of what really happened that day.
I believe in his mind, Linda was his fantasy girl. He saw her running on occasion past his house. She had spoken with him about Joey joining the Cub Scouts.
This was a crime of obsession. He knew she was home alone with just an infant. For whatever reason, decided to act on his impulse that had probably been building up for months and months.
I believe Mr. Jones went over there to visit with her, talk to her, try to induce her into perhaps having sex with him.
He probably got rejected, he got furious, and this was his moment, and he took it out on her. I think his rage, his obsession just consumed him.
Forced sex on her, strangled her, and eventually killed her.
After strangling Linda, Kent stabbed her several times, pinning the comforter to her chest.
These are crimes that are committed by people that just lose control of any rational thought, and that's consistent with the horrible injuries that Linda suffered.
For the second time in 4 years, a jury convicts Kent Jones of murdering Linda Jensen, and he's again sentenced to life in prison.
I was really happy for the Jensen family in particular, especially having to go through a second trial like they did.
I could finally take a deep breath and have this heavy iron coat that I didn't know I was carrying, have that fall off of me, that it's over, it's done.
Though justice is served, Linda's loved ones have never gotten over her loss.
He's not eligible for release until 2030, and I will be there. I will do anything I can to keep this man in jail forever. He should not be able to enjoy life, because he did not allow Linda to enjoy life. There's times that I still want to call her. I miss her every day. I don't have a sister on this earth. And I can still close my eyes and just hear that laugh of hers. That beautiful, carefree laugh, and just loving life. Linda loved life.
A good-natured, fun-loving man.
He was just a wonderful person. He was so funny and so charming.
Enjoying his retirement years.
At that point in his life, he was very content. He was very close to his family, his nieces and nephews.
Is brutally gunned down a month before his wedding.
It was point-blank assassination.
There's a big puddle of blood. Oh, my God!
Investigators pieced together a series of clues.
We had to look at what role that upcoming wedding had and what happened.
They have their arguments. They had their differences.
Was the scene staged to cover up an intentional killing? The investigation kept hitting dead end after dead end.
And chased down multiple suspects.
It was a whodunit. We were hoping for that break to come.
Revealing a plot fueled by greed.
He was somebody who had had a criminal history of theft and assault.
Just when police are close to making an arrest,
it was like he had just got smacked in the head with a baseball bat.
They uncovered damning evidence pointing to a surprising suspect.
You never expect anything like this.
And then all of a sudden the kill was right in front of us.
On a warm July afternoon in 2014, the sleepy Pittsburgh suburb of Kennedy Township is rocked by a panicked call to 911.
What's going on? I just come home from work, and my husband, he's been on the ground. He's dead. There's a big puddle of blood.
Police, fire, and ambulance are coming, okay?
Oh, please help me. Oh, my God.
The woman who made the 911 call, Carol Lapaya, says the victim is her soon-to-be husband, 59-year-old Jack Parks.
When I arrived on scene, the first thing I noticed is that the victim's head was covered in blood. It was on closer examination that you could see it was a gunshot wound. One challenge we had right out of the gate was that there was no casing or gun found. We don't move his body until it can be photographed. It was possible there was a gun underneath him that no one had seen, so we weren't 100% sure if the gunshot wound at that point had been self-inflicted or homicide. We looked for a while. Unfortunately, we didn't find any type of gun.
Detectives searched for any signs of what happened to Jack and who pulled the trigger.
It was pretty clear right off the bat that this was some type of a home invasion or robbery that occurred.
It didn't look like a struggle had ensued in the room, but once you walked through the victim's house, the further you got into it, the more you realized the level of disarray it was in. And as you went into the dining room, you started to see jewelry box here, a drawer gone through here, papers rifled through. Upstairs, there was just complete disarray. The drawers were all pulled out. The clothing that was inside the drawers was strewn everywhere. Jewelry boxes flipped open, empty watch boxes laying there.
We were trying to determine, was the scene staged? Was someone just trying to make it look like a robbery or a burglary, and when in fact they're just trying to cover up an intentional killing where they intended just to walk in and execute somebody? The house was dusted and processed for DNA and fingerprints. We then began to process the outside of the residence, looking for any type of forced entry, and none of that was found.
Our first thoughts were the victim either knew the actor or was familiar with him. That's just our first impression. So, who was friends with the victim, who would have access to the victim, who would have opportunity to the victim, and who would he trust?
It really was a shocking case. He was killed execution style. This homicide happened in an area that we don't normally have murders.
Jack's death is the first homicide in Kennedy Township in 10 years. The news stuns his family and friends.
When I got that phone call and I heard Carol's voice, I knew something was wrong. And she said, "Jack's gone." I said, "What do you mean, gone?" She said, "He's dead." And then she said he was murdered. And I just went into shock.
Jack Parks was born the second of 5 kids in Pittsburgh in 1955. Friends and family were everything to him.
Jack always made friends. He was one of the best people I've ever known. He would do anything for anybody. We first met in first grade. We hit it off all through high school. And after that, it was a good ride.
Jack was so well liked. He could be charming when he wanted to and funny. He was just a wonderful person.
In 1989, a chance encounter changed Jack's life.
Jack met Carol at the local bar, and I guess they hit it off.
They were 2 peas in a pod. Since he brought Carol, we fell in love with Carol.
Jack was very close to his family. He had about 9 nieces and nephews.
Jack and Carol used to have their nieces and nephews over for sleepovers, making the popcorn and just having a good time. You'd have swore that Jack and Carol were the parents. They didn't have kids, so when those kids were around, they were their kids.
Jack had recently retired, but had big plans for the future.
At that point in his life, Jack was very content. Him and Carol were going to get married.
They've been together for over 25 years. Carol in the beginning really wanted to get married, and Jack didn't. And then at one point, Jack wanted to get married, and Carol didn't. And I used to tell Jack, you know what, I like to be living when you get married, when you say I do. And then when they set the date, I was so happy. It was going to be an exciting, very exciting day.
Tragically, Jack was murdered a month before the ceremony was to take place.
Her and Jack were going to be married on August 31st of that year, and it was really sad. It was so close.
At 5 p.m. on July 21st, 2 hours after Carol found Jack dead, police questioned her at the station.
Talking to Carol was so important because, first of all, we had to determine whether she was or wasn't involved, and we wanted to just get the best timeline from her. During the interview with Carol, she explained that she had left for work as usual, her normal time, about 5:40. She starts work at 6. Everything was fine when she left for work. It wasn't until a realtor called her about a potential buyer for Jack's late mother's home. And when the realtor couldn't get a hold of Jack, Carol started to worry. She tried to call Jack and there was no answer.
So then she got concerned. He always called her back every time that she tried to get a hold of him. So I think it was approximately about 2 o'clock she left work and then come over and find Jack, of course.
Detectives know that spouses are always the first suspect and must determine if they can trust Carol's version of events.
We have a timeline between 6 a.m. to 3 p.m. when she returns home. In some cases, you know, if a person's a cold-blooded killer, they may have killed him before she left the house, and then all of a sudden she finds him and, you know, and the killer's right in front of us.
Her demeanor, she was very upset, but you can't take a chance by skipping a stone and not trying to look at her.
Detectives are suspicious of why it took the couple so long to decide to get married, and if someone had cold feet.
Something that we thought is, are either one of them having affairs with someone else? Could that be a possible motivation, and is this upcoming wedding triggering that?
Coming up, detectives uncover a family feud.
They just decided to distance themselves and not let him come to the house.
And learn Jack's inner circle isn't as loving and devoted as it first seems.
Things got more contentious.
As police keep digging, more suspects surface.
We learned of several burglaries.
They had concerns about the employees. They hire criminals.
Just when the investigation is about to hit another dead end.
We had no idea who would have done this.
Detectives make a crucial discovery.
It was exactly what we needed.
When we got the phone records back, it was, oh my God.
That was an aha moment.
Kennedy Township Police are investigating the area's first homicide in a decade. 59-year-old Jack Parks was found dead in his home by his fiancée Carol in what appears to be a robbery. But since there was no forced entry, investigators try to determine if this was actually a staged attack, and if the motive was something more personal.
When we interviewed Carol, we had to look at what role, if any, that upcoming wedding had in what happened. We had to start looking at every aspect of their lifestyle. What were the family dynamics? We had to chip away at a number of things in their life. Things that happened that day, but also things that might have happened in the past that could be a motivation for this murder.
They had their differences. They'd have their arguments. But it wasn't my point to get involved in their squabbles.
We kept talking more and more about any kind of problems that they had had in their home. And I asked her, do either of them have a gun? And she said that they did not.
Carol says she would never do anything to hurt the love of her life. She wanted to marry him. Jack was her soulmate.
Jack and Carol, they loved each other. They felt they were already married. To everybody, they were husband and wife years before, the wedding was planned.
Carol was very upset. It was very difficult to talk to her while she processed that emotion, but then to still get the information we needed to keep moving the investigation forward. To me, that was a sign that she wasn't involved.
With suspicion shifting from Carol for now, investigators explore whether theft was the main motive.
The bedroom was ransacked. The mattress was disturbed. Things were emptied out of drawers.
Carol had indicated to me some items that should be there. Their wedding rings that they had bought. Jack collected some coins. He had some expensive watches. She indicated that the watches should be in the boxes. When we first processed the areas of disarray, none of those items were there. That was our first big clue to go off of. I knew that if we could find that jewelry, we could find who was involved. We didn't know if the person who took it might have given it to someone else, but we had to start with where is it, who has it, and how did they get it.
The next morning, the autopsy report comes in.
He was taken out with one shot and to the right side of his head. It took it to a level where you know that is someone who probably came there with the intent to either use that weapon to intimidate or control Jack. There was a projectile that was recovered from his skull, and we were able to determine that we were looking for this .380.
So that was a good start for us. Now we knew what kind of gun we were looking for.
During the victim's autopsy, you could see that there were no wounds on his hands at all. There were no scratches, there were no broken fingernails, nothing that seemed to indicate that he had had a chance to fight back. He had been caught completely off guard.
During Carol's interview, she indicated to police that Jack's nephew, Bradley Johnson, is someone they should look into.
Bradley was living across the street with his mother and father, across the street from Jack. And he was always over there. And from what I understand, he was one of the last ones to see Jack alive.
We made contact with Bradley, and Bradley had told us that he had gone over to Jack's house on the 21st, and he said he got there around 10:30 in the morning.
Detectives find that timing suspicious. They know Jack was killed sometime between 6 a.m. and 3 p.m. that day.
I asked him, I said, Bradley, what did you go over there to talk to him about? And he said, well, Jack's mother had passed away, and he knew that Jack was looking to sell the home. But Bradley wanted to negotiate a deal with Jack, and he wanted to talk to Jack alone because he said, you know, I don't want Carol weighing in on this. I wanted this to be a Parks family matter, and I want to discuss it with him. In his words, I didn't want her putting her 2 cents in. And that was a phrase that seemed to hint at some kind of animosity.
Bradley tells investigators that he finds Carol too controlling and that she shouldn't have a say in this family decision.
Jack wanted to wait until he could talk with Carol about it, which sort of defeated the purpose of why Bradley had gone there when she wasn't home. So he said he ended up leaving and they were going to revisit the conversation later.
As investigators press him further, Bradley reveals an alarming fact.
We did ask him about any firearms that he owned, and when Bradley told us he owned a .380 caliber pistol, it kind of was like, okay, this may be something broke bad, because now we know Carol leaves for work at 6 a.m. and Jack's alive at 10:30 because Brad's telling us he's over there.
He indicated he had left about 11:15. With Bradley's timeline, it definitely seemed that Bradley was very close in time to when Jack would have been killed. And he put himself there. He had the same type of gun.
Had the discussion about Jack's mother's house turned fatal?
With the timing of Bradley's conversation with Jack, it made me wonder whether things got more contentious than he was alluding to in my interview with him, or did he leave there upset, or did somebody else come back and do something to Jack? It had to be looked into.
"12 hours after Jack Parks was found dead, investigators chased down leads around their latest person of interest, Jack's nephew, Bradley Johnson.
When I found out that Bradley was a suspect, I was mad. I was really upset. knowing that they thought that. But then again, when it comes to an investigation, police are doing their job.
Bradley and Jack had a disagreement, and he admits to owning the same caliber gun.
So that definitely stepped up our interest in Bradley. This is a gun that we needed to take a look at.
Bradley's gun was collected, taken to the lab where it was test fired. The ballistics on the gun did not match the projectile that was recovered from Jack during the autopsy.
With nothing concrete linking Bradley to the murder, he is dropped as a suspect. Detectives also corroborate Carol's alibi.
On the day that this happened, we were able to verify that she was at work and she was accounted for at that time. We were able to eliminate Carol as a suspect.
Looking for new leads, detectives speak to the other nieces and nephews who were close to Jack.
During our interview of Carol, she had told us about her nephew, Michael LaPella, who was almost like a son to her, and he had been at the house a lot.
They got along good. Michael joined the military. Jack was very proud of Michael. Jack took pride in the nieces and nephews because he watched them grow up.
Michael was brought in to the homicide office and interviewed about Jack's murder. And during that interview, Michael had said that he was unemployed. He was trying to seek help through the VA hospital due to his PTSD from being in the Army. Michael had been discharged from the military due to his use of cannabis.
Michael also admits he'd fallen out with the family, including his aunt and uncle, and hadn't seen them in a year.
He specifically denied being over near the victim's house, and he made reference to them being estranged. Michael had a bit of a drug problem, and Carol and Jack decided to distance themselves from Michael and not let him come to the house.
Detectives still need to know where Michael was when Jack was killed.
We knew Carol left around 6 a.m. We knew that Bradley was there about 10:30. We knew Carol found him around 3 o'clock. So there's a window of opportunity of about 4 hours. He told us he was at home in Sharpsburg on the day of the incident, July 21st, 20 minutes away from Jack's house.
He said that his girlfriend had kind of unexpectedly taken the day off and they spent the day together. Nothing out of the ordinary. He gave us some landmarks on our timeline that we could check out. Michael and his girlfriend Melanie had gone and done some shopping in the town that they lived in. He said that he had had a doctor's appointment at the VA hospital later that afternoon. These were things at businesses and locations that we could check from doing surveillance video or getting sales transactions. Michael's girlfriend Melanie did corroborate his activities, and she stated they had spent the day together.
It was determined that his alibi had checked out.
A day into the investigation, with Jack's closest circle cleared, investigators escalate the search for the missing jewelry.
We were physically going to many pawn shops to try to see if anybody had sold this jewelry. We didn't get any traction with that.
That's when we started doing a canvass of the neighborhood.
When we were doing our neighborhood canvass, so many people had mentioned near their house there's a meat factory, and they had concerns about the employees. We had heard things like they hire people with records, they hire criminals. From talking to Carol, she said they have a straight view into Carol and Jack's home, and Jack had mentioned sometimes he would let people use his phone or use the bathroom when they were on their break, and it upset her.
In a case like this, you may see, hey, look at this guy, he got some gold on. It's a crime of opportunity.
We knew that they got their morning break right around the time when people stopped hearing from Jack, so we definitely wanted to look into that and see what the consensus was over there.
I think we did like almost 40 interviews of all the employees to see who they were.
One worker in particular piques police interest.
Ronald Evans was a name that came up from multiple employees in the context of people who had gone over to Jack's. This may be the person that Carol was aware that had come over there. Ronald Blevins was somebody who had had a criminal history of petty theft and assault, so he was on our radar for sure.
Investigators worked quickly to bring Ronald in for an interview.
Ronald indicated that he had known Jack and they were actually friendly, and that's why he was allowed to come into the house when Carol wasn't home. Carol said she would get upset with Jack. She would say, "Jack, don't just let anyone in our house. You can't do that." And he would just, kind of shrug it off. But she just didn't want people coming into the house that she didn't know.
Investigators asked Ronald point blank if he had anything to do with Jack's murder.
He said he had no involvement in Jack's death. The day that Jack was killed, Ronald didn't come to work. He had actually taken scheduled vacation for Friday and Monday. Ronald Blevins' alibi checked out, and we were able to eliminate him as a suspect in this case.
Desperate for a new lead, investigators look for similarities with other robberies in the area.
After Jack's murder, we talked to the local authorities, and during that we learned of several burglaries, one of which an older lady was burglarized and about $5,000 worth of quarters were taken.
Jack's killer had stolen his coins as well as jewelry. Is this the same person? And could they strike again?
The neighbors were very afraid. We still have a killer out there.
It was a whodunit. Once something like this happened, you think that anything's possible now.
Police investigating the cold-blooded shooting of Jack Parks suspect his murder could be linked to another recent robbery in the neighborhood.
We learned that during that burglary, there were some items similar to what Jack had that were taken, and it was a burglary that happened during the day, which is the timeline we were looking at in this particular incident. Oftentimes in our investigations, we see that residential burglaries are done during the day in bedroom communities where the chance of the people inside the home being at work are better, and that way they can go in and they can take what they need without fear of being caught.
With Jack being retired and home all day, had he caught the burglar red-handed and paid the ultimate price? The neighboring police department already has a suspect in custody.
Vernon Zielinski was identified as a possible suspect in this case. He had been recently arrested.
The items that Vernon was accused of taking were coins. Well, Jack had coins that were missing. So Vernon Zielinski was tracked down and he was interviewed. We really just wanted to do an interview and determine what connection, if any, he had to Jack. During the interview, he said that he had been arrested for the burglary, but that burglary was at an old employer's house. He denied knowing Jack, and he said that the day that this happened, he was actually at work.
We confirmed that through his new employer, that he was working that day, during the time frame that this would have occurred.
Vernon was somebody we were absolutely able to rule out of being directly involved. At that stage in the investigation, we had no idea who might have done this and why.
48 hours after Jack's murder, with no arrests in the case, fear is growing in Kennedy Township.
Everyone was concerned that how in broad daylight can someone walk into a house, kill somebody, and walk out without even being seen.
The hardest thing to comprehend was the murder. It was point-blank assassination. Stone cold killing. You never expect anything like this. I know I didn't.
Waiting for an arrest. You're still in that daze of trying to process it all. He's not coming back. It's just too unbelievable. Is this going to be another murder unsolved?
We had a lot of information to go on, and we were constantly moving the investigation forward. People were being eliminated, further suspects were being developed.
3 days after Jack was discovered dead, police get a major break.
A local pawn shop in Sharpsburg PA, which is another small little borough within Allegheny County. The owner had called the local police due to some suspicious activity. On the day of the incident, July 21st, he said a gentleman came in with a cachet of gold and was trying to sell it to him.
What the employee found to be concerning was, first of all, the jewelry was manipulated. It was very distinguishable pieces, but they had been, it seemed to be hammered or just manipulated in a way that would make them hard for law enforcement to identify. It threw up a red flag to him, but also he seemed to think that this was a person who had sold him stolen jewelry in the past. So he didn't buy the jewelry, but he also had the foresight to know he wanted to see where this jewelry might have come from. He knew it was important to get a picture of it. So he took a photograph of the items that this person was trying to sell.
He provided us with the photographs, and they were taken to Carol, who viewed them.
She became very upset. She started crying, and she said, "That's our jewelry."
It felt like we were closing in. Based upon the photograph of the jewelry, we were able to get that out to the local department. They could share it with the pawn shop owners in town if anyone comes in with this.
Investigators hope they can identify the seller.
The pawn shop owner was able to give a good description of the person who brought the jewelry in. A younger white male, black hair, and thin build. That description was provided to the local police chief in Sharpsburg, and he thought that fit the description of a white male from that area. It gave us a very good lead in this case. A photo array was put together to include 8 individual photographs, and they were shown to the shop owner.
We have a set of instructions that we give them, and we say, the person that we're looking for may or may not be in here, but if you see the person indicated on the lineup. So once he reviewed the photo array, he did identify who that person was. It was a huge break. It was exactly what we needed.
Coming up, police find stunning evidence pointing to Jack's killer.
In the video, we knew exactly who it was.
This was a shock to everyone.
You never thought that would happen. It would be that person.
But making an arrest wouldn't be easy.
She provided alibis for him and just denials.
Until investigators find proof no one can deny.
Those records don't lie.
Detectives have just identified the man who tried to pawn murder victim Jack Park's jewelry. His name? Brian Gibbons.
He's been a known thief to the local police department. We went after that lead strong.
We were feeling pretty confident that Mr. Gibbons may be our man, or at least know who our man was. We were very excited and very motivated to go find him.
Brian has a long history of petty crimes, but investigators need to determine if he's a killer. 4 days after the murder, they get a warrant to search his home.
Specifically, we were looking for any of the very distinguishing items that Jack Parks had. Unfortunately, we didn't find any of the victim's jewelry in the house, but we did find some items that did turn out to be stolen from someone else.
Based upon the search at Mr. Gibbons' residence, we were able to arrest him and have him sent to the county jail.
Investigators question Brian about Jack's missing jewelry.
He said that he didn't have anything to do with it. At that point, we were trying to determine if perhaps he'd been given some jewelry to sell, that maybe he didn't know its origin and he went to go sell it. We really just wanted to see if we could come up with any connection to rule him either in or out on the homicide of Jack Parks.
Brian tells detectives he doesn't know the victim and has never been to his home.
He said he had no connection to Jack at all. He denied having any knowledge of the Jack Parks homicide. We asked, well, what's your alibi? And he goes, I was arrested for entering an abandoned house that day. And that was confirmed. Brian was not the killer. He had a solid alibi.
It was clear that he was not the same individual who had come in to the store on that Monday that tried to sell the jewelry.
The pawn shop owner mistakenly identified the wrong person.
The investigation kept hitting dead end after dead end.
We thought we had it, but then once we eliminated him, we took a pause. We had to step back a minute, not start all over, but then keep everything else in perspective.
While detectives hunt for new leads, Jack's loved ones struggle with their grief. Instead of looking forward to Jack's wedding, 5 days after his murder, they attend his funeral.
When he told me he was going to get married, his brother and I would have stood up for him. I was proud because I was never a best man. And there I was, carrying his casket. God, to have something like that happen in such a quick time, it's devastating to everybody.
You feel the hurt, but it really doesn't sink in until the funeral's all over. And then the shock is over. It's reality. He's gone.
Fearing the case could go cold, a week after the murder, police step up the hunt for Jack's stolen jewelry, hoping the culprit is still attempting to sell it at a pawn shop.
We all just sort of fanned out, and we took particular geographical areas. We knew there was still a person that was out there trying to sell Jack's jewelry, and we had to just keep holding out hope that the pawn shop would take their identification, that they would keep good records. That's what kept us going, honestly. There's a detective in the city of Pittsburgh who is a pawn shop records analyst, and I reached out to her and I told her what items that we had missing, and on August 4th I heard back from her, and she told me that she had found the jewelry where it had been sold.
Investigators race to the pawn shop.
We had to go take a physical look at it, see who, if anybody, was on camera. Some store policies, all they have to do is take an individual's driver's license number. They don't even have to make a photocopy of it. So we were trying to remain optimistic that somehow we would get an image of the actual person who tried to sell that jewelry. It could have been anyone at that point.
The pawn shop has surveillance video, and what detectives see on tape is jaw-dropping.
It was, oh my God.
We knew exactly who it was. In the video, it was Michael Lapaya, which was Carol's nephew that Jack raised like one of his own.
This was a shock to everyone.
When we first had dealings with Michael, early on in the investigation, he did provide an alibi about businesses he was at, doctor's appointments.
Michael had his girlfriend Melanie saying that he was with her during the time that Jack would have or could have been killed. So it was kind of going back, trying to retrace what he had initially told us.
We still had to do a little bit more digging. We had to work on if we were missing something. Early on, when we talked to Michael, he had given detectives his phone number. I wanted to get his phone records.
While investigators wait for those records, they call Michael back in.
We are going to interview him and see what he has to say now that we have him on tape pawning his uncle's jewelry.
We decided that it would probably be ideal to bring Michael and his girlfriend Melanie in at the same time, being that she was the person who was providing an alibi for him, and chip away at that and see where the truth lied. We took them both back to our office, and they were interviewed in separate rooms. Michael, in his interview, was initially very adamant that he had nothing to do with this. He denied involvement with the murder, involvement with the jewelry, and he just would not deviate from that.
Melanie stands by her story, too.
She provided alibis for him and just denials.
Melanie is pretty much telling us that he was with her during the time that Jack would have or could have been killed.
She was just defensive and trying to argue with what we knew was not true. And that was that he had sold Jack's jewelry. We showed her a picture of the jewelry and she tried to say it was hers. And we knew that was a lie.
With neither Michael nor Melanie cracking under the pressure, Detectives need something to break the deadlock.
When we got the information about the cell phone records, it was a huge break. We were very happy that it finally had come through. It was like everything came full circle.
Two weeks after Jack Parks was shot to death in his own home, investigators get the break in the case they needed. Incriminating cell phone GPS data.
When I got Michael's phone records, I started to see where generally he spent most of his time, which was consistent with his home.
He told us he was in Sharpsburg, 20 minutes away from Jack's house, on the day of the incident.
Parts of his alibi checked out, cell phone data-wise, but there was an anomaly where about 11:45, his cell phone pinged over in the area of Jack and Carol's house. To me, the significance of 11:45 was it is in this time where Carol can't reach Jack.
It would be impossible to be in Sharpsburg and your phone ping off a tower in Kennedy Township. The amount of distance between the two, it wouldn't be possible. He was not at home. He was over near his uncle's house.
So 11:45, Michael's phone being over there was an aha moment. Those records don't lie.
Detectives want to see how Michael will react when confronted with his own cell phone records.
It was like he had just got smacked in the head with a baseball bat. He became very quiet, took a second, and he just let it all out.
I was suffering from PTSD, and the morning of July 21st, I asked Mel to take a ride with me. She just drove down with me and I parked her car. I told her to wait. She never got out of the car. She had no clue where we were going.
Michael's explanation of why he went to see Jack only raises more suspicion.
About a year ago, I was accused of stealing jewelry, and I wanted to make amends. I wanted to fix it. I knocked on a door to apologize and talk. At that time, he became hostile, and he choked me and swung at me.
His story changed to self-defense.
He had two hands around my neck, and at that time, I felt my life was threatened, and I had a pistol 380 on me. It went off.
Reconciling that just wasn't possible. Jack was shot one time, right close to his ear. Basically, someone held a gun to his head and executed him.
He fell to the floor, and I panicked. Ren grabbed jewelry, and I left.
Michael tells detectives he sold the jewelry for $1,000. Even more shocking is what he spent the money on.
You stated that that's one of the people you sometimes purchase narcotics from.
Yes. I gave him about $600 to $700.
In addition to that, several days later, what did he give you?
He gave me heroin.
Michael was following a path of substance abuse that was getting to be more addictive drugs, and his use was increasing. It wasn't recreational anymore. It was more the behavior of an addict.
It was heartbreaking for us to know that someone who was almost like Jack's son, a very close family member, would do something like that in exchange for a couple of dollars to get high.
I believe Michael went to that house to take jewelry. He knew Jack was there, and the only way he was going to get that jewelry is if Jack was dead. He walked up to the house, and as soon as Jack met him at the door and turned his back to him, he shot him, and he fell, and he died instantly.
On August 5th, 2014, Michael LaPaya is charged with first-degree murder.
To say to Carol, we know who did this. It was hard, but the hardest answer that we had for her is when she said, Michael who? And he had the same last name as her, really. It was hard to tell her that, it's your nephew. And it just hit her, and she was very upset.
You never thought that would happen. It would be that person.
It's still to this day so hard to believe that somebody that they loved Michael could have done something like this. I mean, what he did, I can't describe. There's no words.
At trial, Michael is found guilty. On December 9th, 2015, the 24-year-old is sentenced to life in prison.
He took a loving, caring man and just executed him. There was no winners. We lost Jack. Who won? Nobody.
I would never forgive him. Michael took away my best friend, my brother. He took away a lot from me. To this day, I still hate the guy.
Jack will never be forgotten. In the beginning, it's hard talking about a loved one without really breaking down crying. But you continue to talk about him. You keep their memory alive. And that's how he stays with us.
Every day, he's here in my mind, my heart, and my dreams. I see his face. Always smiling. I know he's flying with the angels.
A beloved father and devoted basketball coach.
Jimmy loved kids.
He loved to talk about coaching basketball and God.
Ruthlessly gunned down in his own home.
There were 10 shell casings. Whoever did this wanted to make sure that he was dead.
Leaving a whole community devastated.
I just started screaming. I literally just lost it.
Detectives follow evidence down a twisted trail.
It was what we call a whodunit. All the doors were locked to some fashion.
There was muddy footprints coming into the foyer area.
To uncover a number of suspects.
He immediately lawyered up. He didn't want to talk about anything.
He had just filed for divorce before he was killed.
Was there some sort of romantic thing gone awry?
And unveil a killer no one could have ever imagined.
They had no remorse, no confessions.
You saying that you killed him?
It shocked me very, very much. This could happen to anybody.
Cordova is a peaceful suburb just east of Memphis, Tennessee. Its wide open spaces and strong church communities make it a haven for families.
Cordova is one of those very safe neighborhoods. Kids riding up and down to the bikes. You honk at your neighbor and your neighbor waves.
It's not a place that we're accustomed to seeing violent crimes.
But in the winter of 2013, the town's carefree spirit is disrupted by a troubled call to police.
The initial call came on a Friday morning from the principal at Ridgeway High School.
Jimmy McLean had not reported to work. He was a school teacher and a basketball coach.
Jimmy was always punctual, so when he didn't show up for work, people immediately started worrying about Jimmy.
Our patrol officers go over there and they knocked on the door. Nothing. The front door was locked, the back door was locked, the garage door was shut, all the windows were locked. Nothing appeared to be opened or broke. And then one officer was able to look in through some glass doors. And then he saw something that looked like a shell casing.
Immediately on alert, officers quickly force entry into the home.
As soon as they made entry, they saw a black male on the floor with a lot of blood around him. Dead.
Homicide investigators are on the scene within minutes.
When I first arrived, we see a male victim laying in the den area of the house who appeared to have been shot multiple times.
whoever did this wanted to make sure that he was dead.
Detectives find a wallet in the victim's pocket. The ID inside confirms this is 49-year-old Jimmy McClain.
The big thing that stood out at that time was the numerous shell casings that were scattered throughout the living portion of the residence.
There were 10 shell casings, and they were all the same caliber, 40 caliber, but they were 2 different brands. That puts a theory in your head. Was there 2 shooters, one brand in one gun, one brand in the other? Or was it just one shooter with mixed rounds?
Detectives can find no murder weapon at the scene, but something else grabs their attention.
There was muddy footprints coming into the foyer area, which we knew were not any of our officers' prints.
We were able to lift those prints.
I truly was hoping we could identify the type of shoe and the actual size of the shoe.
There were no signs of fingerprints to the naked eye, so we were able to swab the doorknobs, both interior and exterior on the front door, for the presence of DNA.
An exhaustive search of the house yields no sign of forced entry.
We had no signs of robbery, no signs of burglary. The big thing to me was all the doors were locked to some fashion. Meaning someone had locked the door on their way out upon leaving the scene. That told me that most likely our suspect had a key to the residence.
So once we realized that somebody had let themselves in, we were like, well, who's got access to these keys? Did Jimmy know the person who did this?
Detectives also attempt to discover the approximate time the murder happened.
We were able to find out there was a shots fired call that came in our dispatch around 8:50 p.m. 2 days before we found the body.
So started making sense real quick, though, that that's probably when this happened.
As police continue their investigation at the scene, Jimmy's sister, Easter, arrives.
To this day, that is the absolute worst day of my life. It's the day I came around the corner and saw yellow tape around my baby brother's house, who I love so dearly. The police asked me, "Ma'am, do you know who lives here?" I said, "My brother is my brother. Where's my brother?"
Officers confirm Easter's worst fears and tell her that her brother has been killed.
I just started screaming, just howling.
Detectives ask Easter and Jimmy's mother, Jamela, to come downtown. Through her tears, Easter tells detectives how young Jimmy grew up to be such a beloved figure.
We grew up in eastern Arkansas. Jimmy is the 4th of 8 kids. He was intelligent, precocious, very athletic.
From a young age, Jimmy McClain had a passion for basketball.
Jimmy walked tall, slender, like a greyhound. It's real tight muscle, flexible, agile.
His nickname was Full Time because he never played half speed. He always played full speed, and that's how he took life.
Jimmy had played basketball with Scottie Pippen. Jimmy considered Scottie Pippen a friend, and I think it was likewise.
After 7 years of professional basketball, Jimmy took up coaching.
Jimmy loved teaching and mentoring. He just was a natural leader with youth.
Jimmy had found his calling, but one part of his life remained unfulfilled.
The thing that he talked to me the most about was his desire to be married.
In the late 1990s, Jimmy met the partner he'd always dreamed of. Her name was Carla.
He was very happy, very excited. He took his relationship very seriously. The next summer, they got married.
Jimmy also became a father to Carla's 2 children from a previous relationship, 16-year-old Tiffany and 11-year-old Dwayne.
He never had children, so he was looking forward to being a father. They all looked up to him as a mentor and as a father, and he spent a lot of time trying to be sure that they were on a good path. He talked to me a lot about the things he was going to do with Dwayne and Tiffany, and he especially wanted to involve Dwayne in summer basketball camps and so forth. He was very serious about being a good husband and a good father.
Together with Carla, Jimmy raised Dwayne and Tiffany as his own. But after 8 years of marriage, cracks started to show in their relationship.
Carla wanted the divorce at first. I do believe that the problems were related to something that occurred early on in their relationship.
Initially, Jimmy had resisted the idea.
I overheard Jimmy telling her that it doesn't make sense for us to be separated. There's nothing wrong. We're not having problems.
But eventually, Carla and Jimmy split up, and after 4 years of separation, Jimmy finally agreed to make it official.
I don't think I really got the full story about exactly what changed his mind and his heart toward her. But he had just filed for divorce a couple of weeks before he was killed.
Detectives are suspicious. Was the timing just a coincidence? Or did Jimmy's looming divorce have something to do with his murder?
We immediately thought we needed to talk to Carla.
Had Jimmy and Carla been in some sort of argument or confrontation?
Coming up, detectives unearth disturbing clues.
There had been a scandal at the high school.
Why are these numbers erased during the same time period as the homicide?
And the truth blindsides everyone.
We had found the needle in the haystack.
They admitted to killing a basketball coach.
Police have just learned that Jimmy McClain filed for divorce 2 weeks before he was killed. And now detectives need to know if animosity between Jimmy and his soon-to-be ex-wife Carla could have been a motive for murder.
We had asked, Carla and Tiffany and Dwayne, her biological children, to come town.
Dwayne and Tiffany wait in the next room while police talk to Carla, starting with her relationship with Jimmy.
She says, look, we were going through a divorce, but it wasn't because he was doing anything bad. She said that we fell out of love.
Carla tells police that when she and Jimmy were married in 2001, Jimmy treated her kids, Dwayne and Tiffany, like they were his own. But as they grew into their late teens, Carla and Jimmy's parenting styles started to clash.
Carla did advise that Jimmy was really hard on her kids. Jimmy was very discipline-oriented, and she always took the side of the kids. In her eyes, they could do nothing wrong. She wasn't going to let Jimmy over-discipline. And some of the issues is what transformed into this growing away from each other.
Detectives ask Carla directly if she stands to gain from Jimmy's death.
She did advise that she had a life insurance policy through her work where Jimmy was on the policy and she would have been the beneficiary.
Was the life insurance payout a motive for Carla to kill Jimmy? Knowing evidence from the crime scene suggests the killer let themselves in. Detectives need to find out if Carla still had access to Jimmy's home.
We actually did ask Carla if she had a key to the house, and she did not have a key that she could remember.
Undeterred, they ask where Carla was on the night of the murder.
She didn't go out and do anything. She said it was raining that night. It was nasty weather. She actually went to her bedroom and read a book. We asked if anybody could verify that. She said, well, my son, Dwayne, because he was at home as well.
To confirm Carla's alibi, police bring in Dwayne and Tiffany, who are waiting in the next room.
When we saw Dwayne, he's a 19-year-old, kid. Dwayne gave a statement advising to us that, when his mom came home, that he just sat and chilled at the house. He didn't have a cell phone, so he would use his mom's. His mom said that she was down in his bedroom. He said he was up in his bedroom, and they didn't see each other the rest of the night.
Dwayne's account lines up with Carla's, but detectives are curious about whether Dwayne had any conflicts with Jimmy.
Tell me about Jimmy. How was y'all's relationship?
It was cool, but we bumped heads a little bit sometimes. He was straight up in the night. He was cool. He fun, loving person.
Dwayne just was like, I can't believe this happened. I don't know who would have done this.
Police turn their attention to his sister Tiffany, and right away sense some tension.
When we interviewed Tiffany, she admitted her and Jimmy butted heads on things, and she actually moved out. She didn't like being parented by him.
Detectives ask where she was at the time of the murder.
Advised she was at home with her boyfriend during the time frame all that Wednesday evening. So at the time we got through interviewing Carla, Tiffany, and Dwayne, there was not anything to lead us to believe that they had any involvement with the death of Jimmy.
To help confirm their alibis, detectives ask for Carla and Tiffany's cell phones.
We were going to use the technology of the cell phone pinging to corroborate where they were the night of the murder.
While they wait for those results, detectives canvass Jimmy's friends and colleagues to find out who else might have had a key to his house.
Early on in the investigation, we had to look at everything. With Jimmy being a high school teacher, with Jimmy being a basketball coach, there was multiple people that could have done this.
We had to start going back to who knew Jimmy. And the first thing we did was work. We spoke with all the teachers. All the teachers liked Jimmy. Other coaches liked Jimmy. The principal liked Jimmy.
Detectives can find no one with a key or even a bad word to say about Jimmy.
He was the kindest, gentlest, most compassionate person that I know. But for somebody to snatch your loved one from you out of their own selfish reasons, it really is heartbreaking, and it makes you mad.
3 days into the investigation, detectives receive Jimmy's cell phone back from forensics and discover that he was texting shortly before he was killed.
He was texting with a female subject, and they were back and forth talking about some directions and basically good night. The last text we identified as a subject named Pam Smith.
The name is new to police, but when they compare the time of her last text with the report of gunshots on the night of the murder, they realize they were just minutes apart. With this new lead, Pam Smith becomes detectives' newest suspect. Who is she? And was she involved in Jimmy's murder?
When you read the text messages between her and Jimmy, the lingering question had to be, was there some sort of, romantic thing gone awry?
Detectives have just discovered that Jimmy McClain was texting with a woman named Pam Smith on the night he was murdered.
We were able to determine that Pam was the last person that Jimmy had contacted.
Investigators need to speak to Pam to see if she has any information that points to the killer.
We called just to say, this is the sheriff's office. Do you know Jimmy? And she was like, yeah, that's my boyfriend.
Detectives inform Pam of Jimmy's murder and carefully gauge her response.
She was extremely distraught. She was like, do I need to come down there? What do I need to do? We still had to figure out who she was, Is she married? Is there an affair situation? Is this a boyfriend, girlfriend situation?
Pam tells detectives that she and Jimmy had only been dating for 6 months.
We were able to sort of dig into the relationship between Pam and Jimmy. What seemed like a healthy relationship.
Pamela claims she was 3 hours away in Nashville at the time of the murder, and she's more than happy to turn over her phone so police can verify her statement.
After talking to her, there was nothing that she gave any kind of suspicion or anything.
Detectives have one more question for Pamela.
We actually did ask Pam if she had a key to the house, and she advised that she did not have a key.
But she says she knows who does.
Pam had overheard a phone call. Jimmy was telling his wife, Carla, that she could come by the house while he was gone to pick up some mail that had come to the house for her. Pam took note that when they left the house, Jimmy didn't leave the mail in the mailbox or on the front door, but he left it inside the house, which told Pam that Carla had a key to the house.
Police believe the killer had a key, but Carla told detectives she didn't have one. The discrepancy raises a red flag.
Is it possible that Carla had a key to the house? How can we prove that she didn't come into the house the night of the murder?
There's only one way to know for sure.
We used the technology of the cell phone pinging to follow her from her work all the way to home.
The cell phone data indicates Carla was home all night, and her daughter Tiffany was too.
Everybody's statements made sense where they were. There was no reason to pursue any other questions with them or Pam at that moment.
Before Carla and Tiffany can be completely ruled out, police must corroborate the calls and texts on their phones with the complete records from the cell companies.
And those can take several days, depending on the circumstance.
A week after the murder, Jimmy's loved ones pay their respects at his funeral.
Jimmy's funeral was held at a local Church of Christ, probably a couple thousand people there. Jimmy touched a lot of people.
Going to Jimmy's funeral was a tough process for myself. So many people loved him.
The mystery of who could have killed Jimmy is on everyone's mind, and grief-stricken loved ones are desperate for answers.
The family was very concerned, but I felt that absolutely the truth would come out.
It was hard waiting and hoping that they get that person before it's too late.
It's very frustrating. After several days, it gets worse. It gets harder to solve, and the family starts to lose hope in you.
The day after the funeral, detectives received the forensics reports.
There was no extra DNA under the fingernails of him to see if he got physically close enough to maybe grab the suspect or anything like that. We didn't get any fingerprints that weren't supposed to be there. Jimmy's prints were the only ones there.
The report isn't all bad news for detectives.
An expert at Nike was able to determine the muddy shoe prints in the entryway of the house most likely came from a Nike Air Force One.
These are basketball-type shoes. They're between the size 10 and 11.
Before detectives can follow up on this new lead, their investigation takes a bizarre twist.
There had been a scandal at the high school.
Ridgeway High School had a very good basketball team. They were one of the top in the state. We started hearing about a student at the school who had just recently gotten in some trouble.
Detectives need to know if the scandal is linked to Jimmy's murder. Staff tells them the player at the center of the storm is number 22, Mackenzie Sewell.
Obviously, he was a fairly good basketball player, but he was also 2 years older than people that he was playing with. He was actually an adult falsified documents to still play high school basketball because he was attempting to try to get a scholarship to play.
A week after Jimmy is found dead, the scandal explodes into the headlines.
This man used a fake transcript to enroll here at Ridgeway High, and our sources tell us the man has a GED, but enrolled here simply so he could play basketball.
A humiliated Mackenzie is kicked off the team and out of Ridgeway High.
The dream of the NBA is over. The coaches were like, oh my goodness, because the whole school gets punished for it. They get disqualified from being able to play.
The scandal raises a key question for detectives. Had Jimmy discovered the truth about Mackenzie and been silenced before he could report him to authorities?
Did Jimmy initiate this whole situation? Because we knew Jimmy was an ethical individual. If Mackenzie thought Jimmy had anything to do with this, then this could be a reason why Jimmy was murdered.
Police are eager to talk to Mackenzie, but that's not going to happen.
He immediately lawyered up. He didn't want to talk about anything.
Detectives try a different approach. They go to speak with the person who registered him at Ridgeway High, his mother, Chandra Nicole. What she tells them is more bizarre than they could have imagined.
What we found out is that was his wife.
Detectives hunting the killer of high school basketball coach Jimmy McLean are investigating whether a scandal involving one of his players is linked to his death. Now they discovered that the player's mother is actually his wife. She admits to helping Mackenzie falsify his age, but says it wasn't Jimmy who had discovered the deception.
She had actually called in to say that he was falsifying records, that he wasn't supposed to be in the school because they had gotten into an argument.
While enjoying his second go-around in high school, Mackenzie began a relationship with a fellow student. When his wife caught wind of it, she told the school about Mackenzie's scam.
It was a domestic situation between him and the wife. It really didn't have anything to do with Jimmy. Didn't fall on Jimmy at all.
Once again, a promising lead evaporates into thin air, and over a week into the investigation, police are starting over.
I was back to square one again. I was starting to question myself and wonder, are we gonna get anywhere with this thing?
I was starting to be concerned. I wanted to know when people were gonna be charged.
Just as investigators begin to fear the trail growing cold, they received the complete cell phone records for Jimmy's ex-wife, Carla, and her daughter, Tiffany.
We had ordered direct cell phone records to corroborate the exact records that we had initially dumped. You're talking hundreds, even thousands of records at times to look through, to see if you can find where there's a discrepancy in something.
After days of hard work, police get the break they've been praying for.
Everybody else's phones were making sense, but Carla's phone did not make sense. We noticed there were actually people being texted between 6 and 9, 2 different phone numbers. And that was the time frame of the homicide. Those texts were conveniently erased off Carla's phone. So that automatically piqued interest. So we're trying to identify the 2 phone numbers that were deleted. And we identified one of them as a subject named Robert, and then another subject named Heather. We looked up Robert real quick and found out Robert was a convicted felon for dope dealing. But why are these numbers erased the night of the murder? At that point, I felt it necessary to call Carla back in and talk to her again, and then further identify maybe Heather and Robert since we had names on them.
When detectives press Carla about the texts, she tells them they belong to her son and Jimmy's former stepson, Dwayne. Detectives already know that Dwayne uses his mom's phone since he doesn't own one of his own.
Carla said that Heather was a girlfriend. She says, oh, she's a good girl. She's a girl that lives out in Cordova, not too far. Carla said wasn't too fond of Robert, but she did admit he and Dwayne were friends. He says, well, I don't really like him hanging out with Robert too much. You know, he's a troublemaker.
Knowing that Dwayne was texting with a known felon during the time frame of Jimmy's murder is a red flag for detectives. So they asked Dwayne to join his mom down at the station.
The way we approached Dwayne was like, hey, we're having to kind of start over and get a more detailed events of the night. And he advised when his mom got home, he had the phone, he spoke with one of his friends, and then Heather came over.
When detectives finish with Carla and Dwayne, they quickly contact Heather to see if she can confirm Dwayne's story.
She said, I went to Dwayne's house later that evening. So she has confirmed that she went over there.
It seems like it's another dead end. Yet, when detectives follow up with a question about the basketball shoe print found at the crime scene, the interview takes a promising turn.
We asked about the shoes, and she said, oh, Dwayne has these Air Force Ones, and he wears a size 10.5, which fit the crime scene. And at that point, she said, and I remember seeing those Air Force Ones out on the porch, but I hadn't seen them since then. She said, I even have a picture of them. And when she showed a picture, it was a picture of Dwayne staying in the kitchen with a AR-15 rifle and these Air Force Ones.
Police quickly get a search warrant for Carla's home.
Searching the closets and everything else, that there's no Air Force Ones in there. There's no shoes that match the homicide. Took pictures of his room, and we left. We didn't come out at that house with anything.
So far, linking Dwayne to the crime has not proven fruitful. But detectives have another strategy.
We know for a fact that there was text messages between Robert and Dwayne during the homicide. We feel that those texts could be very important. Since he'd erased them off his phone, we couldn't get them. So my goal was to get a search warrant for Robert's phone, hoping that the text messages were still on his phone, visible where we could see them.
While police wait for a warrant to be approved, officers keep an eye on Robert.
I arrived, and within a few hours of setting up surveillance, Robert Collins came out of his house.
At that point, our detectives went to talk to him, and Robert took off running.
Detectives investigating the murder of Jimmy McClain believe text on the phone of convicted felon Robert Collins may point to the killer.
When Robert took off running, he ran a good ways, but we needed to catch him. We didn't want him to destroy his phone or anything like that.
As Robert Collins was running away from the scene, he tossed something.
Our detectives ended up catching him on foot, and when they did, he had a large amount of narcotics.
The illegal drugs give detectives reason to arrest Robert. But even more incriminating is what he tried to discard as he fled.
When we saw that he had tossed a weapon, we immediately thought maybe that was the weapon that was involved.
So in the back of my head, I'm thinking, oh, this is fantastic. Are we going to solve the homicide right now? You get excited, like, hey, we're there, we're going to get this.
Police bring Robert down to the station. But before they question him, they carefully examine his gun and phone.
I think it was very quickly determined it wasn't the weapon from the scene.
Still, detectives have plenty of leverage on Robert.
He's a felon convicted with a handgun. Now he's got another handgun on him and a large amount of drugs. This could easily go federal. Maybe that could help us out. Maybe he'd want to work something out. He wouldn't budge on anything. I don't want to talk to y'all. Basically, he said, just put me in the jail cell. I'll go do my time. You just don't get that. That's just not normal.
Is Robert trying to protect his buddy, Dwayne, or just himself? If he won't give anything up, Detectives hope his cell phone might.
I was hoping that the text messages were still on his phone. Started going through it. Well, Robert had erased his text too. But what Robert didn't erase were some pictures that we were able to get. The day before the homicide, Robert on his phone had a picture of a handgun. It is a similar gun, a .40 caliber Smith & Wesson Sigma, the same caliber used. What was unique about the handgun was not the handgun itself, but where the handgun was laying. And it was laying on a very unique bedspread. When I saw the bedspread, I was like, I've seen that bedspread before. I said, go get the search warrant pictures from when we picked Dwayne up. Well, as we scrolled through more pictures, we finally found a deleted picture that had Dwayne in front of the bedspread. So it tied it all in with the gun in the picture.
Police now know the gun likely belonged to Dwayne or someone in his inner circle. But who used it to gun Jimmy down in cold blood? Detectives hope to find out from Robert himself.
So when we put Robert in jail, we were hoping Robert would say something on the phone. The first phone call that Robert made was to a young guy. First thing that Robert said to the guy was, hey man, that pit bull, it's real sick. And the guy kind of like, I don't think he caught what he was saying. He's like, oh yeah, just laughing, I got you. And Robert, you could see, was very frustrated. Like, no man, I'm not kidding. You need to get rid of that pit bull, it's sick. Bri shouldn't have sold it to you. We did have indication that pit bull was most likely the gun.
And real sick, put it in street terms, means it has a body on it.
Detectives trace the owner of the phone Robert called.
It was a kid named Jamarius that lived in the Cordova area.
We believe that Jamarius Cooper had in his possession the firearm that was used in the killing of Jimmy McClain.
Police get an emergency search warrant and race over to Jamarius' home before he can dispose of the gun.
When we got Jamarius Cooper's bedroom, we systematically started going through places that things could be hidden.
We were going through it and we weren't finding anything. And then one of my detectives, probably into the 30th box or so, he's like, I got something. And I was like, do what?
When I saw that gun, I immediately felt like we had found the needle in the haystack. We had known through this investigation that most likely we were looking for a very specific gun. That is the same style gun that we're looking for. Same caliber, most likely the same brand, the same model.
At that moment, I was like, Jimmy's here. He's guiding us. He's telling us it's all here. He's not making it easy. He's making this puzzle, but it's slowly coming together. So immediately took the gun and had TBI process it. Within a couple hours, they were calling us back on, hey, this is the gun that was used in the homicide of Jimmy McClain. That does bring some emotion to you. Like, oh my gosh, this work, this time, and we're going into 30 days here. I mean, nobody finds a gun used in a homicide in 30 days.
Police need to talk to Jamarius. But before they can track him down, they get an alarming call.
We have a call from Cumberland County Sheriff's Office, and the deputy there said, hey, listen, we just had something weird come in. A white female came running into our station. She was very distraught. She was in her pajamas, and that she said that she wanted to pass on some information, that her husband was upset because his nephew had admitted to killing a basketball coach.
Detectives investigating the murder of Jimmy McClain have just received an unexpected call from a sheriff's office 5 hours away.
And the deputy there said a white female came running into our station. Her husband was upset because his nephew had admitted to killing a basketball coach. Her husband was Carla's brother, which was Dwayne's uncle.
Detectives are stunned. Dwayne's uncle is Donald Page, a known felon. Detectives bring him in, knowing they may only have one shot to get him to talk.
He was I'm not talking to y'all, I ain't got nothing to say.
Police remind him of one simple fact. If he's withholding information, that makes him an accessory to murder.
And all of a sudden, he said, look, my nephew said he did it.
Dwayne had, in fact, taken him aside and said, Unc, had to handle my business. And Donald said he looked at him and said, are you saying that you killed him? Dwayne said to him, I had to stand up for my mom.
Dwayne, he loved his mom. They were having some financial issues, and Dwayne thought that if this divorce could just be done with, I could get the money from the house. And I think Dwayne took it upon himself to do whatever he wanted to do, and which unfortunately led to the homicide.
There was tension between Jimmy and Dwayne already. So there was that divorce, money, financial implication, motive.
With an accessory charge hanging over his head, Donald agrees to testify against his nephew.
At that point, I called the prosecutor and told him what we had, and he said, I think it's time to go lock up Dwayne Moore for homicide.
On March 26, 2013, Dwayne Moore is charged with the murder of his own stepfather.
I'm telling you, he just had no remorse, no confessions. He just didn't have any care in the world whatsoever.
When I heard Dwayne had been charged with Jimmy's murder, I felt a lot of relief.
I was shocked to know that someone that he had influenced this long in this young man's life that would take his life.
It went deep to my core as far as emotionally. This was unbelievable because of who Jimmy was.
14 months later, Dwayne Moore stands before the Memphis judge and jury. The prosecution lays out what they believe happened the night of the murder.
Dwayne had it in his head that he was going over there to kill him. He knew that there was a key to the house that Carla might have forgot about. I think he waited until he saw Jimmy pull in, let himself in that front door. Pulled the gun out as soon as he saw Jimmy and started shooting. I think he did it in about 5 minutes at the most. I think he just went in there and started blasting away.
To try to imagine what Jimmy must have gone through in the final moments that he was living is extremely painful. The awful terror he must have felt, knowing that his life was about to end.
On June 27, 2014, Dwayne Moore is convicted and sentenced to 22 years in prison without the possibility of parole.
It hurts. It hurts that somebody thought so little of my family that they could take somebody so precious to us.
While Jimmy's family still misses him every day, his love for educating young people lives on.
To honor Jimmy's memory, we established a scholarship in his name at the University of Arkansas at Conway.
I think Jimmy would want to be remembered by being a godly man, a kind man, and a peaceful man.
That's what helps me to try to let the anger go. Don't be mad. Just thank God that he was here and that he was my brother for as long as he was. I miss him and I love him.
For more information on an unexpected killer, go to Oxygen.com.
Xin chào các bạn, hôm nay mình sẽ tô bức tranh về chủ đề ngày Tết nha. Sẽ tô đèn lồng trước. Mực này và màu này bị